Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I'm diving into some stories Reddit has to offer. These aren't your typical romance novels where everything works out perfectly. These are real people sharing their most vulnerable moments, their biggest betrayals, and the kinds of relationship disasters that make you question everything you thought you knew about love and trust. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's explore some tales that prove love can be beautiful, messy, devastating, and sometimes absolutely insane. Lastly, before we get started, if you've been watching the videos for a while and still aren't subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that button. It would mean a lot to me. Anyway, our first story comes from someone who learned that friendship and love don't always play by the rules we expect. My best friend confessed to liking my partner. I've been with my boyfriend Ryan for about 2 years now, and my best friend Clara has been in my life since middle school. We've been through everything together: breakups, college stress, family drama, you name it. Clara was actually the first person I told when Ryan and I started getting serious, and she seemed genuinely happy for me. Ryan and Clara got along great from the beginning. They'd chat easily when she came over, laugh at each other's jokes, and I loved that two of the most important people in my life clicked so well. Clara would often join us for movie nights, dinner dates that turned into group hangouts, and weekend trips. It felt like the perfect dynamic. About 6 months ago, I started noticing subtle changes in how Clara acted around Ryan. She'd dress up more when she knew he'd be there, laugh a little too hard at his jokes, and find excuses to touch his arm or shoulder during conversations. I brushed it off as my imagination, thinking maybe I was being paranoid or jealous for no reason. Then Clara started asking weird questions about my relationship. How was Ryan treating me? Did I think we'd get married? Was I really happy? At first I thought she was just being a caring friend, looking out for me like she always had. But the questions became more frequent and more pointed. Last month, Clara started showing up at places she knew Ryan would be, even when I wasn't there. She'd text me later saying she'd run into him at the coffee shop near his work or at the gym he goes to. She'd always have some innocent explanation about why she happened to be in that area, but it was starting to feel like too many coincidences. 2 weeks ago, everything came to a head. We'd all gone out for dinner to celebrate Ryan getting a promotion at work. Clara had been unusually quiet during dinner, barely touching her food and seeming lost in thought. After we paid the check, Ryan went to the bathroom, and that's when Clara grabbed my arm. She looked at me with this intense expression I'd never seen before and said she needed to tell me something important. My stomach immediately dropped because I could tell from her tone that whatever she was about to say would change everything between us. Clara took a deep breath and said, "I've been in love with Ryan for years, since before you two even got together." I felt like the world had stopped spinning. Years? I asked her what she meant, and she explained that she'd had feelings for Ryan since the first time I had introduced them. She said she'd tried to get over it, tried to be happy for us, but watching our relationship develop had been torture for her. She told me she'd been hoping her feelings would fade, but instead they'd only gotten stronger. She said seeing how happy Ryan made me was both wonderful and devastating because she wanted to be the one making him happy. Clara admitted that she'd been finding excuses to be around him because she couldn't help herself. Then came the part that really broke my heart. Clara said she'd been wrestling with whether to tell me because she knew it would probably ruin our friendship, but she couldn't pretend anymore. She said she wasn't asking me to break up with Ryan, but she needed me to know how she felt. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was angry that she'd been harbouring these feelings and essentially lying to me for 2 years. Part of me felt betrayed that she'd been inserting herself into my relationship under false pretenses. But part of me also felt sad for her because I could see how much pain she was in. When Ryan came back from the bathroom, the tension was obvious. Clara made an excuse about feeling sick and left immediately. Ryan asked what had happened, and I told him everything. He was shocked and said he'd never suspected Clara felt that way about him. He assured me that he'd never encouraged her feelings and that he only saw her as my friend. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I kept replaying every interaction between Clara and Ryan, looking for signs I'd missed. I felt stupid for not seeing it sooner, but also confused about whether there really had been signs or if I was just rewriting history in my mind. Clara texted me a few days later with a long apology. She said she regretted telling me, not because the feelings weren't real, but because she'd hurt me and potentially damaged my relationship. She said she understood if I needed space and that she'd respect whatever boundaries I needed to set. I've been thinking about this non-stop for 2 weeks now. On one hand, Clara was honest with me about something that must have been incredibly difficult to admit. She didn't try to sabotage my relationship or make a move on Ryan. She just told me how she felt. On the other hand, I feel like our entire friendship has been built on a lie. Every time she hung out with us, every piece of relationship advice she gave me, every time she comforted me when Ryan and I had a fight, she had ulterior motives. How can I trust that any of her support was genuine when she was secretly wishing she was in my place? Ryan has been incredibly understanding through all of this. He's made it clear that his feelings haven't changed and that he wants to work through this together. But I can tell he feels uncomfortable about the situation too. He's mentioned feeling guilty, even though he didn't do anything wrong. I haven't talked to Clara since she sent that text. I don't know if our friendship can survive this revelation. Even if I could forgive her for having feelings she couldn't control, I don't know how to get past the fact that she hid this from me for so long. Every memory we have feels tainted now. The worst part is that I miss her. Despite everything, Clara has been my best friend for over a decade. She knows me better than almost anyone, and losing her feels like losing a part of myself. But I don't know how to move forward when I can't trust her motives anymore. I keep wondering if there were signs I should have seen. Were there moments when Clara crossed a line that I dismissed? Did Ryan ever notice her feelings and not tell me to avoid drama? I'm questioning everything about the past 2 years. Part of me wants to try to salvage the friendship, maybe with strict boundaries about her involvement in my relationship. But another part of me thinks that would be unfair to everyone involved. How can Clara get over her feelings for Ryan if she's still in our lives? How can Ryan and I move forward if there's always this underlying tension? I've been going back and forth about whether to respond to Clara's text. What would I even say? That I forgive her, that I need time, that our friendship is over? None of those options feel right, but I can't ignore her forever. This whole situation has made me realise how complicated love and friendship can be. Clara didn't choose to fall for Ryan any more than I chose to fall for him. But the way she handled it, keeping it secret for so long and inserting herself into our relationship feels like a betrayal of our friendship. I don't know what the right answer is here. Do I prioritise my relationship with Ryan and cut Clara out of our lives? Do I try to maintain the friendship and hope Clara can move past her feelings? Or is there some middle ground where we can all coexist without this becoming an ongoing source of drama? That story ends there. The complexity of loving someone your best friend is dating creates such an impossible situation for everyone involved. There's no villain here, just 3 people caught in circumstances that none of them asked for, and the painful realization that sometimes being honest can hurt more than staying silent. Speaking of complicated relationship dynamics, our next story shows what happens when tradition becomes an excuse for questionable choices. My boyfriend took his ex to prom instead of me. I'm a senior in high school, and I've been dating Ethan for about 8 months now. We started going out in September, right after school began, and things have been really good between us. He's sweet, funny, and we have this easy chemistry that made me think I'd finally found someone special. Prom has been on my mind since January. All my friends were talking about dresses, making plans, and figuring out who they were going with. I just assumed Ethan and I would go together since we'd been together for months by that point. We talked about it casually, looking at themes and venues, and I'd started looking at dresses online. In March, I found this gorgeous deep blue dress that I fell in love with. I showed Ethan pictures of it, and he said it would look amazing on me. I took that as confirmation that we were definitely going together. So I bought the dress and started planning the rest of my outfit. 2 weeks before prom, I was talking to Ethan about dinner reservations when he got this weird look on his face. He said we needed to talk about something, and my heart immediately started racing because that tone never leads to anything good. Ethan told me that he'd already made plans to go to prom with his ex-girlfriend Madison. I thought I'd misheard him, so I asked him to repeat what he'd just said. He confirmed that yes, he was taking Madison to prom, not me. I was speechless. I asked him when he'd made these plans, and he said they'd been set since before we'd started dating. Apparently Madison had asked him to prom last spring, when they were still together, and he'd said yes. Even though they'd broken up over the summer, he felt obligated to honour that commitment. I pointed out that we'd been dating for 8 months, and that it was completely inappropriate for him to take another girl to prom, especially his ex-girlfriend. Ethan said he understood why I was upset, but Madison was counting on him, and he couldn't let her down at the last minute. He explained that Madison hadn't been able to find another date, and since they'd already planned to go together, it would be mean to abandon her now. He said it wasn't romantic, just 2 friends going to a dance together. He promised it didn't mean anything, and that he'd rather be going with me. I asked him why he hadn't told me about this arrangement sooner. He admitted he'd been hoping Madison would find someone else to go with, so he wouldn't have to choose between honouring his commitment to her and going with me. When it became clear that wasn't going to happen, he felt stuck. The whole conversation felt surreal. I couldn't believe my boyfriend was choosing his ex-girlfriend over me for one of the biggest events of senior year. I told him how hurt and embarrassed I was, that all my friends knew I was planning to go with him, and that I'd already bought a dress. Ethan kept apologising and saying he wished things were different, but he felt like his hands were tied. He said Madison had been really excited about prom and had bought her dress specifically to match his tuxedo. He didn't want to crush her dreams at the last minute. I pointed out that he was crushing my dreams instead, but he said that was different because I could still find someone else to go with, or go with a group of friends. Madison, according to him, would be devastated if he backed out because she'd been planning on going with him for almost a year. The more he explained his reasoning, the angrier I became. It felt like he was prioritising his ex-girlfriend's feelings over mine, and I couldn't understand how he thought that was acceptable in a committed relationship. I asked him how he'd feel if the situation were reversed, if I told him 2 weeks before prom that I was taking my ex-boyfriend instead of him. He admitted he wouldn't like it, but said this was different because he'd made the commitment before we were together. I told Ethan that I thought he was making a huge mistake, and that this felt like a betrayal of our relationship. I said if he chose to go with Madison, he shouldn't expect me to be okay with it, or to act like nothing had happened. He said he hoped I'd understand, and that we could work through this after prom was over. He promised that nothing would happen between him and Madison, that it was purely platonic, and that he'd make it up to me afterward. I spent the next few days crying and venting to my friends. They were all outraged on my behalf, and couldn't believe Ethan was choosing his ex over me. Some of them suggested that maybe there were still feelings there, that no guy would prioritise an ex-girlfriend unless he wasn't over her. I tried to think of it from Madison's perspective, wondering if maybe she really was just a friend who needed a date. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. If they were really just friends, why couldn't she find another date? Why was Ethan so concerned about disappointing her, but not about disappointing me? 3 days before prom, I made a decision. I told Ethan that if he went with Madison, we were done. I wasn't going to sit at home feeling sorry for myself while my boyfriend took another girl to prom, especially not his ex-girlfriend. Ethan begged me to reconsider, saying I was being unfair and putting him in an impossible position. He said he loved me, not Madison, and that one night shouldn't define our entire relationship. But I told him that his choice to prioritise her over me had already defined our relationship. I ended up going to prom with a group of my girlfriends. We had an amazing time dancing, taking pictures, and celebrating the end of senior year. I wore my blue dress and felt beautiful, even though it hurt knowing I should have been there with Ethan. During prom, I saw Ethan and Madison together several times. They looked good together, I have to admit. Madison was wearing a silver dress that complemented his black tuxedo perfectly, and they seemed to be having fun dancing and talking with their friends. What bothered me most was how comfortable they looked together. It didn't look like two friends reluctantly fulfilling an obligation. It looked like a couple enjoying prom together. They were laughing, holding hands during slow songs, and posing for pictures like they belonged together. At one point, I saw them slow dancing to a particularly romantic song, and Madison had her head on Ethan's shoulder. They looked so natural together that it made me question whether their breakup had really been as final as Ethan had led me to believe. After prom, several people told me they'd seen Ethan and Madison kissing at the after party. When I confronted him about it the next day, he initially denied it, but eventually admitted that Madison had kissed him, and he hadn't pulled away immediately. He swore it didn't mean anything, that it was just the romantic atmosphere of prom, and that he'd told Madison afterward that he was committed to me, but the damage was done. My worst fears about prom night had come true. I broke up with Ethan that day. I told him that his decision to take Madison to prom had shown me where his priorities were, and the kiss had confirmed that I was right to be concerned about his feelings for her. Ethan tried to win me back for weeks after that. He sent flowers, wrote long letters explaining his side of the story, and had friends reach out to me on his behalf. He insisted that the kiss was a mistake, and that he'd learned his lesson about putting other people's needs before mine. But I couldn't get past the fact that when it came down to choosing between Madison and me, he'd chosen her. The kiss was just confirmation of what I'd suspected all along, that he still had feelings for his ex-girlfriend. Looking back now, I'm glad I stood my ground. A boyfriend who truly loved and respected me wouldn't have put me in that position in the first place. He would have found a way to explain to Madison that his relationship status had changed and that he couldn't take her to prom anymore. The whole experience taught me a lot about boundaries and self-respect in relationships. Sometimes people will test how much you're willing to tolerate, and if you don't stand up for yourself, they'll keep pushing those boundaries further and further. I heard through friends that Ethan and Madison got back together shortly after graduation. Part of me wonders if prom was just an excuse for them to reconnect, or if spending that evening together reminded them of what they'd had. Either way, I'm grateful I found out who Ethan really was before we got any more serious. That story is over. The tradition excuse falls apart pretty quickly when you realise he was basically using a technicality to go on a date with his ex. The fact that they ended up back together just proves that sometimes your gut instinct about these situations is absolutely right. Moving on to our next tale, which shows how some people think opportunity and timing give them permission to cross every line imaginable. My girlfriend's roommate tried to kiss me while she was out. I've been dating Natalie for about 6 months, and things have been really solid between us. She shares an apartment with her college friend Mara, who I'd met a few times during group hangouts, but never really talked to one-on-one. Mara always seemed friendly enough around me, maybe a little too friendly looking back on it now. She'd laugh really hard at my jokes, even the ones that weren't particularly funny, and she had this habit of touching my arm when she talked to me. I didn't think much of it because some people are just naturally touchy, and I figured she was just being welcoming since I was dating her roommate. Last weekend, Natalie had to work a double shift at the restaurant where she waitresses. She'd been complaining about being short on rent money, so when they offered her the overtime, she jumped at the chance, even though it meant working from noon until almost midnight. I'd planned to spend the day with Natalie, so when she had to work, I offered to just hang out at her apartment and wait for her to get home. She gave me her spare key and said I could order food, watch TV, whatever I wanted. Mara would be there, but she'd probably be in her room studying for finals. I spent most of the afternoon on the couch, watching Netflix and scrolling through my phone. Mara came out a few times to get snacks from the kitchen, and we'd make small talk about school and work. Everything seemed completely normal. Around 7 in the evening, I was getting hungry, so I went to the kitchen to see what they had for dinner. I was looking through their fridge when Mara came up behind me and started talking about how nice it was to have some company in the apartment. She said she got lonely sometimes when Natalie was working late, and that she was glad I was there to keep her company. She was standing closer to me than necessary, and I could smell her perfume, something sweet and floral that she definitely hadn't been wearing earlier. I made some comment about Natalie being lucky to have such dedicated co-workers who could cover for each other, trying to steer the conversation back to safe territory. But Mara just laughed and said something about how Natalie was always working and never had time for fun anymore. She started talking about how I seemed like the type of guy who knew how to have a good time, and how it was a shame that Natalie was always too tired or too busy to appreciate me properly. I started feeling uncomfortable because it seemed like she was criticizing my girlfriend, and I wasn't sure why. I told Mara that Natalie and I were happy, and that I understood she had to work hard to pay for school and rent. I tried to move away from the fridge to give myself some space, but Mara stepped closer instead of backing away. That's when she put her hand on my chest and said, "She doesn't deserve you, you know. You're too good for someone who's never around." Before I could respond, she leaned in like she was going to kiss me. I immediately stepped back and put my hands up to create distance between us. I told her that wasn't appropriate and that I was with Natalie. Mara looked embarrassed for about 2 seconds, then smiled and said she was just testing to see what kind of guy I was. She claimed she was being protective of her roommate and wanted to make sure I wouldn't cheat on Natalie if given the opportunity. She said I'd passed the test and that she was glad to know Natalie was with someone trustworthy. I didn't buy her explanation for a second. The way she'd looked at me, the way she'd positioned herself, the things she'd said about Natalie not deserving me, none of that seemed like a loyalty test. It felt like a genuine attempt to start something between us. I told Mara I thought her test was inappropriate and that I was going to wait for Natalie in her bedroom instead of the common areas. Mara shrugged and said she understood, but added that she hoped I wouldn't mention this to Natalie because it might cause unnecessary drama between roommates. I spent the rest of the evening in Natalie's room with the door closed, feeling completely uncomfortable about what had happened. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I'd somehow misread the situation or if Mara had really been trying to kiss me. When Natalie got home around midnight, she was exhausted but happy to see me. She asked how my day had been and whether Mara had been good company. I hesitated because I wasn't sure how to explain what had happened without causing problems. I decided to tell Natalie the truth. I explained what Mara had said about her not deserving me, how she'd tried to kiss me, and her claim that it was all just a test. Natalie's expression went from confused to angry as I told the story. Natalie said this wasn't the first time Mara had done something like this. She'd apparently tried to flirt with Natalie's previous boyfriend too, but Natalie had chalked it up to Mara being drunk and not thinking clearly. This incident made her realise there might be a pattern. She confronted Mara the next morning while I was there. Mara initially denied everything, then switched to claiming it was a misunderstanding, and finally admitted she'd been attracted to me, but swore it wouldn't happen again. Natalie told Mara that having her roommate try to seduce her boyfriend was completely unacceptable, and that she needed to find somewhere else to live. Mara got defensive and said Natalie was overreacting, that guys hit on girls all the time and it wasn't a big deal. The argument escalated when Mara accused Natalie of being jealous and insecure, saying that if our relationship was really solid, one little incident wouldn't threaten it. She said I was the one who'd been friendly and giving her mixed signals, which was completely untrue. I spoke up and told Mara that I'd never flirted with her or given her any indication that I was interested. I said her behaviour had made me uncomfortable and that her attempt to blame me for her actions was unfair. Mara packed her things and moved out that week. Before she left, she made one last attempt to convince Natalie that I'd been encouraging her attention and that she was just trying to protect her by showing her what kind of person I really was. Natalie didn't buy it for a second. She said she trusted me completely and that she was sorry I'd been put in that position. She was more upset about having to find a new roommate and cover the full rent until she could find someone than she was about Mara's behaviour. The whole situation made me realise how important it is to be completely transparent with your partner about these kinds of incidents. If I'd kept it to myself, Mara might have tried something more aggressive later, or she might have found a way to twist the story to make me look bad. It also made me appreciate Natalie's trust in me. A lot of people might have blamed their partner or assumed there was more to the story, but Natalie believed me completely and took action to protect our relationship. Mara tried to text me a few times after she moved out, apologising and asking if we could be friends. I blocked her number and told Natalie about the messages. Some people just don't understand boundaries, and giving them any opportunity to cross lines again is a mistake. That story wraps up there. The loyalty test excuse is absolutely ridiculous, and the fact that she'd pulled similar moves before just proves this was calculated, predatory behaviour. At least Natalie had her boyfriend's back and didn't fall for the manipulation. Our next story involves someone who thought friendship rules didn't apply when it came to matters of the heart. My friend secretly went on dates with my crush. I've had a crush on this girl Ashley from my psychology class since the beginning of the semester. She's smart, funny, and has this infectious laugh that makes everyone around her smile. I'd been working up the courage to ask her out for weeks. My friend Toby knew all about my feelings for Ashley because I'd been talking about her constantly. I'd analyse every conversation we had in class, wonder if she was flirting when she borrowed my notes, and stress about the perfect way to ask her out. Toby was always encouraging, telling me to just go for it and that Ashley would be crazy not to say yes. About a month ago, I finally decided I was ready to make my move. I asked Toby for advice on how to approach Ashley, and he suggested I should find out more about her interests first so I'd have better conversation topics. He offered to help by talking to her after class and reporting back with intel. I thought this was a great idea because Toby is naturally more outgoing than I am, and he's good at getting people to open up. Plus, Ashley already knew him from group projects we'd all worked on together, so it wouldn't be weird for him to strike up conversations with her. For the next 2 weeks, Toby would update me regularly about his conversations with Ashley. He told me she loved hiking and indie music, that she was stressed about her upcoming MCAT exam, and that she'd recently gotten out of a long relationship and was taking things slow with dating. Based on Toby's research, I planned what I thought would be the perfect first date. There was an indie band playing at a small venue downtown, and I figured I could ask Ashley if she wanted to go with me. Toby encouraged this plan and said he thought she'd definitely say yes. The day I planned to ask her out, Ashley wasn't in class. I was disappointed but figured I'd try again the next week. When I mentioned this to Toby, he said he'd seen Ashley at the coffee shop earlier and that she'd seemed upset about something. He offered to check on her and see if everything was okay. That weekend, I didn't hear from Toby at all, which was unusual because we normally hung out or at least texted about our weekend plans. When I asked him Monday morning how his weekend was, he was vague and said he'd just stayed home and studied. Over the next few weeks, I noticed that Toby seemed to know a lot more about Ashley's schedule and activities than his casual conversations after class would explain. He'd mention that she was stressed about a particular assignment or excited about some event, details that seemed pretty personal for someone he was supposedly just chatting with for my benefit. I also noticed that Ashley seemed more comfortable around Toby than she used to be. They'd joke around before class started, and she'd seek him out during group discussions. I convinced myself this was good news because it meant she was warming up to our friend group. Last week, everything came crashing down. I was at the campus bookstore when I saw Ashley and Toby together at a corner table in the coffee section. They were sitting close together, sharing a piece of cake and Ashley was laughing at something on Toby's phone. They looked like they were on a date. Ashley was dressed up more than usual, and Toby was wearing the button-down shirt he only brings out for special occasions. They were holding hands across the table. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I ducked behind a bookshelf and watched them for a few minutes, hoping I was misinterpreting what I was seeing, but there was no mistaking the body language and the way they were looking at each other. I left the bookstore without them seeing me and spent the rest of the day trying to figure out what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to confront Toby immediately, but another part of me hoped there was some innocent explanation. That night, I decided to test Toby by asking him how his Ashley intelligence gathering was going. He said he was still working on it and that he'd have more information soon. He looked me straight in the eye and lied about spending time with her. The next day after class, I asked Ashley directly if she wanted to go to the indie concert with me. She got this uncomfortable expression and said she was flattered, but she was already seeing someone. When I asked who, she hesitated, and then said it was complicated. I pressed her a little more, and she finally admitted she'd been dating Toby for 3 weeks. She said she hadn't meant for it to happen, that they'd just connected when he'd approached her to talk about me, and that one thing had led to another. Ashley said she felt terrible about the situation because she knew I had feelings for her, but she and Toby had developed real feelings for each other. She said Toby had been planning to tell me, but they were trying to figure out the right way to handle it. I was devastated, not just because the girl I liked was dating someone else, but because my friend had betrayed me so completely. He'd used the information I'd shared with him about my feelings to pursue Ashley himself, then lied to my face about it for weeks. When I confronted Toby later that day, he initially tried to deny it. When I told him Ashley had already confirmed they were dating, he finally admitted the truth. He said he hadn't planned for it to happen, that he genuinely started talking to Ashley to help me out. But according to Toby, the more time he spent with her, the more he realised they had a connection. He said he'd tried to fight his feelings, but Ashley had made it clear she was more interested in him than in me. He claimed he was doing me a favour by pursuing the relationship instead of letting me embarrass myself by asking out someone who wasn't interested. I told Toby that his reasoning was complete garbage and that he'd betrayed our friendship in the worst possible way. I said if he'd developed feelings for Ashley, the right thing to do would have been to tell me immediately and step back, not secretly date her while pretending to help me win her over. Toby got defensive and said I didn't own Ashley just because I had a crush on her. He said she was free to date whoever she wanted and that I was being selfish by expecting him to sacrifice his own happiness for my unrequited feelings. He also said that Ashley had told him she'd never been interested in me romantically, so I was getting upset over something that was never going to happen anyway. He suggested I should be happy for them instead of making it all about my hurt feelings. I ended the friendship that day. I told Toby that I could have handled Ashley not being interested in me, but I couldn't forgive him for lying to me and using my trust to pursue her behind my back. The betrayal from someone I considered a close friend hurt worse than the rejection. Ashley tried to apologise to me a few days later. She said she genuinely hadn't known how deep my feelings were when she and Toby started getting closer, and that she felt awful about how everything had played out. She said she hoped we could still be friends after things settled down. I appreciated her apology, but I told her I needed space from both of them. Seeing them together in class was already painful enough without trying to maintain friendships with either of them. The hardest part is that I can see why Ashley chose Toby. He's more outgoing, more confident, and apparently better at connecting with people than I am. But that doesn't make what he did okay. A real friend would have either helped me genuinely or been honest about his own interests from the beginning. Looking back, I realised there were signs I missed. Toby's detailed knowledge about Ashley's life, his vague responses about his weekend activities, and the way he kept encouraging me to wait for the perfect moment instead of just asking her out. He was buying himself time to develop their relationship. I've learned a valuable lesson about trusting people with sensitive information. When you tell someone about your feelings for another person, you're making yourself vulnerable. And not everyone will respect that vulnerability. Some people will see it as an opportunity rather than a confidence to protect. The whole experience has made me more cautious about mixing friendship and romance. I still believe friends should support each other in relationships, but clear boundaries need to exist. What Toby did crossed every line of friendship loyalty. That story's finished. Using someone's crush confession as your personal dating strategy is beyond low, and then having the nerve to say you're doing them a favour by stealing their person. The mental gymnastics people use to justify betraying their friends never cease to amaze me. Now let's dive into a tale that proves some people think legal technicalities excuse absolutely terrible timing. My fiancé invited his ex to our wedding as a bridesmaid. I'm getting married in 3 months to the love of my life, Julian. We've been together for 2 years, and I thought I knew everything about him. Julian is kind, thoughtful, and has always been upfront about his past relationships. He's mentioned his ex-girlfriend, Sophia, a few times, usually in passing when talking about college memories or mutual friends they still have. When we started planning our wedding, I was excited to choose my bridal party. I picked my sister as maid of honour and 3 of my closest friends as bridesmaids. Julian said he was still figuring out his groomsmen, but that he had a few guys in mind from work and college. Last month, Julian came to me with what he called a slightly unusual request. He said he wanted to include Sophia in our wedding party, specifically as one of my bridesmaids. I was completely caught off guard and asked him to explain why he thought that was appropriate. Julian said that Sophia had been a huge part of his life for 4 years, and even though their romantic relationship had ended, she was still one of his closest friends. He said she'd been incredibly supportive during some difficult times in his life, and he couldn't imagine getting married without her being there to celebrate with us. He explained that Sophia had been asking about our wedding and had seemed hurt when she realised she wasn't included in the wedding party. Julian said he felt bad because she'd always assumed she'd be part of his wedding someday, even after they broke up. I told Julian that having his ex-girlfriend in our bridal party felt inappropriate and uncomfortable. I said I barely knew Sophia and that it would be weird to have her standing beside me during one of the most important moments of my life. Julian got defensive and said I was being unreasonable. He insisted that Sophia was genuinely happy for us and that she just wanted to be part of our special day. He said their relationship was completely platonic now and that I should trust him. When I asked why Sophia couldn't just be a regular wedding guest, Julian said she'd specifically asked to be in the wedding party because she wanted to feel included and important. He said turning her down would hurt her feelings and potentially damage their friendship. I suggested that if Sophia was so important to Julian, maybe she could be one of his groomswomen instead of my bridesmaid. But Julian said that wouldn't work because his groomsmen were already set, and besides, Sophia had always envisioned herself as a bridesmaid. The conversation got heated when I pointed out that Sophia's feelings about our wedding shouldn't be more important than mine. I said I was the bride, and I should get to choose who stands with me at the altar. Julian accused me of being jealous and insecure. Over the next few days, Julian kept bringing up the topic. He'd mention how disappointed Sophia was, and how awkward things were getting between them. He said she'd been calling him crying about feeling excluded from such an important moment in his life. I started to feel like I was being manipulated. Why was Julian so invested in making his ex-girlfriend happy at our wedding? Why couldn't he tell her no when it was clearly making me uncomfortable? I decided to look at our wedding seating chart that Julian had been working on. What I found made my stomach drop. He'd seated Sophia at the head table right next to him. Not at a table with other friends or college buddies, but literally at the table reserved for immediate family and the wedding party. When I confronted Julian about the seating arrangement, he said he'd just been trying to make sure Sophia felt welcomed and included. He said the head table had extra space and he thought it would be nice for her to sit somewhere special. I pointed out that the head table was supposed to be for the people most important to us, and that seating his ex-girlfriend there sent a very clear message about her role in his life. Julian said I was reading too much into a seating chart. That's when I started paying attention to other wedding details Julian had been handling. He'd added Sophia to our rehearsal dinner guest list without asking me. He'd included her in the group chat with our wedding party. He'd even suggested that she could help with some of the wedding planning, since she had great taste. I felt like Julian was planning a wedding that included his ex-girlfriend as much as it included me. Every decision he made seemed to centre around making sure Sophia was happy and involved. I told Julian that I needed him to choose between having Sophia in our wedding party or having me as his bride. I said I wasn't going to stand at the altar next to his ex-girlfriend while she watched him marry someone else. Julian said I was being dramatic and giving him an unfair ultimatum. He said Sophia was important to him and that he shouldn't have to choose between his fiancée and his friend. He accused me of trying to control his friendships and isolate him from people he cared about. I asked Julian how he'd feel if I wanted my ex-boyfriend to be one of his groomsmen and sit at our head table. He said that was different because I didn't have the same kind of friendship with my ex that he had with Sophia. The fight escalated when Julian suggested that maybe we should postpone the wedding until I could work through my insecurity issues. He said he didn't want to get married if I was going to be controlling and jealous about his friendships. I called off the wedding that night. I told Julian that a man who prioritised his ex-girlfriend's feelings over his bride's on their wedding day wasn't ready to be married. I said if Sophia was so important to him, maybe he should marry her instead. Julian has been trying to win me back for weeks now. He's apologised for not considering my feelings and admitted that he was wrong to prioritise Sophia over me. He says he's cut contact with her and that he's willing to do whatever it takes to fix our relationship. But I can't get past the fact that when it came down to choosing between his ex-girlfriend and his fiancée, he chose her. He was willing to postpone our wedding rather than tell Sophia she couldn't be a bridesmaid. That showed me exactly where I stood in his priorities. I found out through mutual friends that Julian and Sophia have been spending time together since our breakup. They've been seen at restaurants and coffee shops, apparently working through the situation. Part of me wonders if this was what Julian wanted all along, a reason to get back together with Sophia without looking like the bad guy. Looking back, I can see signs that Julian never fully got over his ex-girlfriend. The way he'd light up when talking about her, how he always defended her when other people made comments about their relationship, the way he kept photos of them together in his apartment even after we moved in together. I dodged a bullet by calling off that wedding. A marriage where the groom insists on including his ex-girlfriend in every major decision wouldn't have lasted anyway. I deserve someone who sees me as their priority, not someone who treats me like I'm competing with their past. That story is over. Wanting your ex-girlfriend as a bridesmaid and seating her at the head table isn't about friendship. It's about not being over someone. The fact that he was willing to postpone the wedding rather than disappoint her tells you everything you need to know. At least she found out before walking down the aisle, moving into our next story, which shows how modern technology can reveal the most devastating truths at the worst possible moments. I accidentally found my partner on a dating app. I've been with Renee for about 1.5 years now, and I thought we were in a really good place. We'd talked about moving in together, meeting each other's families, and even discussed what we wanted for our future. She seemed as committed to our relationship as I was. Last weekend, my friend Alex was showing me this new dating app he'd downloaded. He was swiping through profiles and laughing at some of the ridiculous bios people write. I was half paying attention until a familiar face appeared on his screen. It was Renee. Her profile picture was one I'd never seen before, taken recently based on her haircut and the outfit she was wearing. My heart immediately started racing, but I tried to stay calm and get a better look at her profile. Alex didn't know I was dating Renee since we'd kept our relationship pretty private, so he just kept swiping and making jokes about the profiles. but I asked him to go back to the previous one because I thought I recognised someone. When he pulled up Renee's profile again, I could see it was definitely her. The bio said she was looking for something casual and fun, that she loved hiking and indie music, and that she was recently single and ready to explore. The recently single part hit me like a punch to the gut. I tried to play it cool and asked Alex if I could see more of her profile. She had multiple photos, including some I'd never seen her post on social media. One was a mirror selfie in lingerie that she'd definitely taken recently. Another was a group photo from a night out that I remembered her going to just 2 weeks ago. Alex made some comment about how attractive she was and asked if I thought he should swipe right. I quickly made an excuse about needing to leave and got out of there before he could see how shaken I was. I spent the drive home trying to come up with innocent explanations for why Renee would be on a dating app. Maybe it was an old profile she'd forgotten to delete. Maybe someone was using her photos to catfish people. Maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding. But the recent photos and the recently single status made it clear this was an active profile. She was presenting herself as available and looking to date other people while still in a relationship with me. When I got home, I decided to confront Renee directly. I asked her if there was anything she needed to tell me about our relationship, if she was having doubts or wanted to see other people. She seemed confused by the question and assured me that everything was fine between us. I told her I'd seen her profile on a dating app. Her face went completely white, and she was quiet for a long moment before she started explaining. Renee said she'd downloaded the app a few weeks ago, but hadn't actually gone on any dates through it. She claimed she was just curious about what was out there, and that it was more like entertainment than serious dating. She said she'd been feeling a little bored and wanted to see if she was still attractive to other people, but that it didn't mean anything. I asked her about the recently single status, and she said she'd written that because she didn't want people to know she was in a relationship. She said it would be weird to be on a dating app while advertising that she had a boyfriend. When I pressed her about whether she'd been messaging other people through the app, Renee admitted that she had been chatting with a few matches. She said it was just harmless flirting and that she'd never met any of them in person. I asked to see the conversations, and Renee hesitated before handing over her phone. What I found was much worse than I'd expected. She'd been having detailed, flirty conversations with multiple men for weeks. Some of the messages were explicitly sexual, and others were making plans to meet up. In one conversation, she told a guy that she was completely single and looking for something serious. In another, she'd sent photos of herself that I'd never seen, including some that were clearly taken in our apartment. The most devastating conversation was with someone she'd apparently been talking to for almost a month. They'd made plans to meet for drinks the following weekend, and Renee had been talking about how excited she was to finally meet him in person. When I confronted her with the evidence, Renee broke down crying. She said she'd never actually intended to meet any of these people, that it was all just fantasy and escapism. She claimed she'd been feeling trapped in our relationship and needed an outlet that made her feel desired and free. Renee said she loved me and didn't want to lose me, but that she'd been having doubts about whether she was ready for such a serious relationship. She said the dating app made her feel like she had options even if she never planned to act on them. I asked her why she hadn't just talked to me about her feelings instead of seeking validation from strangers online. She said she was afraid of hurting me and thought she could work through her doubts on her own. The conversation that really broke my trust was one where she'd complained to a match about feeling stuck with a boring boyfriend who didn't understand her need for excitement. She'd described me in ways that made it clear she'd lost respect for me and our relationship. I told Renee that what she'd done was a form of cheating, even if she hadn't physically met anyone. She'd been emotionally intimate with other men, made plans to date them, and presented herself as single and available. The fact that she hadn't followed through yet didn't make it okay. Renee begged me not to break up with her. She promised to delete the app and cut contact with everyone she'd been talking to. She said she'd realised how much she could lose, and that she wanted to work on our relationship instead of looking for something else. But the damage was done. I couldn't get past the fact that while I'd been planning our future together, she'd been shopping for my replacement. The things she'd said about me to strangers showed me how she really felt about our relationship. I also couldn't trust that she wouldn't do this again the next time she felt bored or had doubts. If she'd been willing to lie and sneak around this time, what would stop her from doing it again when things got challenging? We broke up that night. Renee was devastated and kept insisting that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd been confused and stupid, and that she'd do anything to fix things. But I'd already seen her true feelings about me and our relationship in those messages. The hardest part was realizing how long she'd been deceiving me. While I'd been introducing her to my family and making plans for us to move in together, she'd been telling strangers that she was single and complaining about being stuck with me. I found out later that she'd actually gone on at least 2 dates through the app before I discovered her profile. Mutual friends saw her out with different guys on nights when she'd told me she was working late or having girls' nights. The whole experience taught me that people can maintain completely different personas online, and that social media and dating apps make it easier than ever to live double lives. It also showed me the importance of paying attention to changes in behaviour and trusting my instincts when something feels off. That story ends there. The just for fun excuse falls apart pretty quickly when you're making actual dinner plans with other people and complaining about your boyfriend to potential dates. Sometimes curiosity about what's out there is really just shopping for an upgrade, while keeping your current option as backup. Our next tale shows how some people think childhood games give them permission to cross every adult boundary imaginable. My boyfriend kissed my best friend during Truth or Dare. I've been with Sam for about 8 months, and he's always gotten along well with my friend group. We're all in our mid-20s, but sometimes we still act like college kids when we get together for game nights and parties. Last Friday, my friend group decided to have a throwback party with games from high school. I thought it would be fun and nostalgic, and Sam seemed excited about getting to know my friends better in a more relaxed setting. We started with some drinking games and moved on to classic party games like charades and Never Have I Ever. Everyone was having a good time, and Sam was fitting in perfectly with the group dynamic. Around midnight, someone suggested Truth or Dare. I know it sounds juvenile for people our age, but we'd all been drinking and it seemed like harmless fun. The first few rounds were pretty tame, mostly embarrassing truths about crushes and silly dares like dancing or singing. My best friend Mia was sitting directly across from Sam in our circle. She'd been flirting with him lightly throughout the night, which I'd noticed but tried to ignore. Mia has always been naturally flirty with everyone, and I figured it was just her personality combined with the alcohol. When it was Mia's turn, she chose Dare. The person asking dared her to kiss the most attractive person in the circle. I expected her to deflect or choose someone single, but she immediately looked at Sam and said he was obviously the most attractive guy there. Everyone in the circle got quiet because they knew Sam was my boyfriend. I looked at Sam expecting him to decline or suggest an alternative, but he just shrugged and said it was just a game. Before I could say anything, Mia leaned across the circle and kissed him. It wasn't a quick peck on the lips like you might expect for a dare. It was a full kiss that lasted several seconds, with Mia putting her hand on Sam's face and Sam not pulling away. Everyone else was watching in uncomfortable silence. When they finally broke apart, Mia giggled and sat back down like nothing had happened. Sam looked at me with this guilty expression, but then laughed and said, "Truth or Dare, right?" like it was all perfectly normal. I was furious but didn't want to cause a scene in front of everyone. I tried to play it off like it didn't bother me, but inside I was seething. The game continued, but I couldn't focus on anything except replaying that kiss in my head. What made it worse was how comfortable both Sam and Mia seemed afterward. They kept making eye contact and sharing little smiles like they had some kind of inside joke. Mia even made a comment about Sam being a good kisser, which made everyone laugh, except me. I ended the party early, claiming I had a headache. Sam offered to stay and help clean up, but I told him I just wanted everyone to leave. After our friends left, Sam tried to act like everything was normal. I confronted him about the kiss and he immediately got defensive. He said it was just a game and that I was overreacting. He pointed out that I'd participated in truth or dare before and done embarrassing things, so why was this different? I explained that kissing my best friend was completely different from singing a stupid song or telling an embarrassing story. He'd been physically intimate with another woman right in front of me, and then acted like it was no big deal. Sam said he couldn't help that Mia had chosen him for the dare, and that it would have been rude and awkward to refuse in front of everyone. He claimed he was just trying to be a good sport and not make things weird for the group. I asked him why he hadn't pulled away or kept it brief, and he said he wasn't thinking about it in the moment. He insisted it meant nothing to him, and that I was being jealous and insecure over a silly party game. The next day, I talked to Mia about what had happened. Instead of apologising, she seemed annoyed that I was bringing it up. She said it was just truth or dare, and that I was being dramatic about something that didn't matter. Mia pointed out that she could have chosen anyone in the circle, but she'd chosen Sam specifically because she thought I'd be more comfortable with her kissing my boyfriend than kissing one of our mutual male friends. She claimed she was actually being considerate. When I told her the kiss had made me uncomfortable and felt like a violation of our friendship, Mia said I was being possessive, and that healthy couples should be secure enough to handle harmless flirting and games. She also mentioned that Sam hadn't seemed bothered by it, and had even complimented her afterward, saying she was a good kisser too. This was news to me since Sam had acted like the kiss was meaningless and forgettable. I confronted Sam about his comment to Mia, and he admitted he'd said something nice to her after I'd left the room. He claimed he was just being polite, and didn't want Mia to feel awkward about the dare, but the fact that he'd complimented her kissing while downplaying the significance of the kiss to me showed that he wasn't being entirely honest about how he'd felt about the experience. Over the next week, I noticed that Sam and Mia were texting each other more than usual. When I asked Sam about it, he said they were just chatting about normal stuff and that they'd bonded during the party. I asked to see their conversations, and Sam hesitated before showing me his phone. Most of the messages were innocent, but there were definitely some flirty undertones. Mia had sent him a few selfies, and Sam had responded with compliments about how good she looked. There was also a conversation where they joked about the kiss and how natural it had felt. Mia had written that she'd enjoyed it more than she'd expected, and Sam had replied with a winking emoji. When I pointed out that their texting had crossed into flirting territory, Sam said I was reading too much into friendly conversations. He accused me of trying to control his friendships and said I was being paranoid. I realised that the truth or dare kiss had opened a door between Sam and Mia that neither of them seemed interested in closing. What had started as a party game had become an excuse for them to explore their attraction to each other. I broke up with Sam the following week. I told him that his behaviour after the kiss had shown me that he wasn't committed to respecting boundaries in our relationship. The game might have been an excuse, but his actions afterward revealed his true feelings. Sam tried to convince me I was overreacting and throwing away a good relationship over nothing. But I'd seen how he looked at Mia during that kiss, and I'd read the flirty messages between them. The truth or dare had just given them permission to act on feelings that were already there. Mia and Sam started dating about a month after we broke up. When mutual friends told me about their relationship, Mia claimed they'd only gotten together after Sam and I had ended things, but I know the truth, night during the game. Looking back, I think that their connection started that they both used truth or dare as a way to test the waters without taking full responsibility for their actions. They could claim it was just a game while secretly exploring whether there was something between them. That story is over. Using a childhood game as an excuse to make out with your friend's boyfriend is pathetic, but the real betrayal was all the flirting and bonding that happened afterward. Truth or dare doesn't give you a free pass to disrespect your relationship, and the fact that they ended up together proves this was never just about a silly game. Let's move into our next story, which shows how some people think their romantic history gives them permanent access to special occasions. My girlfriend's ex showed up to her birthday dinner, and she didn't send him away. I've been dating Cleo for about 10 months now, and her birthday was last week. I'd been planning this dinner for weeks, making reservations at her favourite restaurant and coordinating with her friends to make sure everyone could attend. Cleo has mentioned her ex-boyfriend Marcus a few times in passing, usually when talking about places they'd been together or mutual friends they still have. She's always been clear that their relationship ended amicably about a year before we started dating, and that they occasionally text but don't really hang out anymore. The night of her birthday dinner, I arrived at the restaurant early to make sure everything was set up perfectly. I'd arranged for flowers, coordinated with the staff for a special dessert, and even brought a playlist of her favourite songs for them to play during dinner. Cleo arrived with 3 of her girlfriends, and we were having a great time catching up and celebrating. About halfway through dinner, I noticed someone approaching our table from across the restaurant. It was Marcus. I recognised him from photos Cleo had shown me, and he was walking directly toward us with a confident smile. Cleo's expression changed immediately when she saw him, but not in a way that suggested she was unhappy to see him. Marcus walked up to our table like he belonged there and said, "Happy birthday, beautiful." He leaned down and hugged Cleo, holding the embrace longer than seemed appropriate for an ex-boyfriend greeting someone in front of their current partner. Cleo seemed flustered, but not angry. She thanked him for coming and gestured for him to sit down in the empty chair next to her. I was shocked that she was inviting him to join our intimate birthday dinner without even asking how I felt about it. Marcus had brought a gift, an expensive necklace that he presented to Cleo with a flourish. He said he'd seen it in a store window and thought of her immediately, that it reminded him of one she used to wear when they were together. Cleo put the necklace on right there at the table, and Marcus complimented how beautiful it looked on her. He said some things never change, referring to how good she looked in jewellery he picked out for her. I was sitting there feeling completely invisible while my girlfriend's ex-boyfriend took over her birthday celebration. He was charming and confident, telling stories that made everyone laugh, and clearly comfortable being the centre of attention. What bothered me most was how natural Cleo seemed with Marcus there. She wasn't sending him away or setting boundaries. Instead, she was engaging with him like this was completely normal, laughing at his jokes and asking about his life. Marcus even made a toast to Cleo, talking about how special she was and how lucky anyone would be to have her in their life. He looked directly at me during part of the toast, like he was making some kind of point about appreciating what you have. During dinner, Marcus kept finding excuses to touch Cleo's arm or shoulder while telling stories. He'd lean in close to whisper comments that would make her laugh. It felt like I was watching my girlfriend on a date with her ex-boyfriend. The conversation naturally flowed toward memories Marcus and Cleo shared, inside jokes and experiences that excluded everyone else at the table. Her friends seemed uncomfortable with the dynamic, but no one said anything. When it was time for dessert, Marcus insisted on paying for the entire table. He said it was the least he could do for Cleo's special day. I tried to object since I'd planned and organised the dinner, but Cleo said it was sweet of Marcus to offer. After dinner, Marcus suggested we all go to a bar he and Cleo used to frequent together. Again, Cleo seemed enthusiastic about the idea, and her friends reluctantly agreed to continue the celebration. At the bar, Marcus bought rounds of At the Bar. Marcus ordered Cleo's favourite drink without asking what she wanted, remembering exactly how she liked it made. He knew the bartender and got us a prime table, acting like he was hosting the entire evening. Throughout the night, Marcus kept bringing up romantic memories he and Cleo shared. He'd reference trips they'd taken together, songs that were their song, and moments from their relationship that clearly held special meaning for both of them. Cleo wasn't shutting down these conversations or redirecting them to include me. If anything, she seemed nostalgic and happy to reminisce about their time together. She'd add details to his stories and laugh at memories I couldn't be part of. At one point, Marcus pulled out his phone and showed everyone pictures from a vacation he and Cleo had taken to Italy 2 years ago. They looked incredibly happy together in the photos, and Marcus made comments about how that trip had been one of the best weeks of his life. Cleo was looking at the photos with this wistful expression, clearly lost in the memories. When Marcus joked about how they'd gotten lost in Rome, but had the most romantic night because of it, she blushed and smiled in a way that made my stomach turn. I finally excused myself to go to the bathroom, partly to get some air, and partly to see if anyone would notice I was gone. When I came back, Marcus was sitting even closer to Cleo, and they were deep in conversation about something that was making her laugh hysterically. Her friends had started talking among themselves, clearly feeling as left out as I was. It had become the Marcus and Cleo show, with the rest of us just background characters in their reunion. Around midnight, Marcus announced he had to leave, but thanked everyone for letting him crash the party. He hugged all of Cleo's friends goodbye, then saved Cleo for last. Their goodbye hug lasted at least 30 seconds, and I heard him whisper something in her ear that made her smile. After Marcus left, the energy at our table completely changed. Cleo seemed deflated, like the fun part of her birthday was over now that he was gone. Her friends started making excuses to leave, and within 20 minutes, it was just Cleo and me. In the Uber ride home, I asked Cleo why she'd let Marcus take over her birthday dinner. She said she was surprised to see him but thought it would be rude to ask him to leave. She claimed she hadn't known he was going to show up. I asked her how Marcus had known where we were having dinner and what time we'd be there. Cleo hesitated before admitting that they'd been texting earlier in the week, and she might have mentioned her birthday plans. When I pressed her about why she was texting with her ex-boyfriend about her birthday, she said it wasn't a big deal. She claimed Marcus had reached out to wish her happy birthday, and she'd just been making conversation when she mentioned the dinner. I pointed out that inviting himself to her birthday celebration was incredibly inappropriate, and allowing him to stay was disrespectful to me and our relationship. Cleo said I was being jealous, and that Marcus was just being friendly. She insisted that Marcus was part of her past and that I had nothing to worry about. But the way they'd interacted all night, the intimate conversations and shared memories, didn't feel like just friends to me. Over the next few days, I noticed Cleo was texting more frequently and smiling at her phone in ways she hadn't before. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd give vague answers about friends from work or school. I eventually discovered that she and Marcus had been in constant contact since her birthday. Their text conversations were filled with references to how great it had been to see each other and how much they'd missed talking regularly. In one exchange, Marcus had written that seeing her again had reminded him of everything he'd loved about their relationship. Cleo had responded that she'd felt the same way and that she'd forgotten how easy things were between them. There were also messages where they'd made plans to meet for coffee to catch up properly, and Cleo had told Marcus that she'd been thinking about their Italy trip and how happy she'd been during that time in her life. When I confronted Cleo about the messages, she admitted that reconnecting with Marcus had brought back a lot of feelings she thought she'd gotten over. She said she was confused about what she wanted and needed time to figure things out. I asked her if she wanted to break up so she could explore whatever was happening with Marcus. She said she didn't want to lose me, but she also couldn't stop thinking about Marcus and whether they'd made a mistake breaking up. Cleo suggested we take a break while she sorted through her feelings. She said it wasn't fair to me to stay in a relationship when she was having doubts and thinking about someone else. I told Cleo that if she needed to take a break to figure out her feelings for her ex-boyfriend, then we were done permanently. I wasn't going to wait around while she decided between me and Marcus. She seemed shocked that I wouldn't wait for her to work through her confusion. She said she'd thought I cared about her enough to give her space to figure out what she really wanted. I explained that her allowing Marcus to hijack her birthday celebration and then entertaining the possibility of getting back together with him showed me exactly where I stood in her priorities. She'd chosen to explore her past instead of protecting our future. Cleo and Marcus got back together 2 weeks after our breakup. Mutual friends told me they'd been inseparable since then, acting like no time had passed since their original relationship ended. Looking back, I think Marcus crashing her birthday dinner was a calculated move to remind Cleo of what they'd had together, and unfortunately, it worked exactly as he'd planned. The whole experience taught me that when someone's ex shows up uninvited to a special occasion and your partner doesn't immediately send them away, it's a pretty clear sign of where their loyalties lie. That story ends there. Letting your ex crash your birthday dinner and then entertaining getting back together with him while you're dating someone else is the definition of having your cake and eating it too. The fact that they reconnected so quickly afterward proves that dinner was basically an audition for getting back together. Now, let's dive into a story that shows how some people think legal loopholes excuse absolutely devastating timing choices. My fiancé got engaged to someone else too. I thought I'd found my soulmate in Harper. We'd been together for 3 years, living together for 1, and engaged for 6 months. Our wedding was planned for this upcoming fall, and I genuinely believed we were building a life together. 2 months ago, Harper started acting strange. She'd be distant during conversations, spend more time on her phone, and seemed less excited about wedding planning than she had been. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd say she was just stressed about work. The changes were subtle at first, but they became more obvious over time. Harper would get calls that she'd take in other rooms, claim she needed space to think about her career, and seemed generally less invested in our day-to-day relationship. 3 weeks ago, Harper told me she needed a break from our relationship. She said she was feeling overwhelmed by the wedding planning and needed time to make sure she was making the right decision. She asked if we could postpone the wedding and take some time apart. I was devastated, but agreed to give her the space she needed. Harper said she loved me, but needed to be completely sure before we got married. She moved back in with her parents and said she'd contact me when she was ready to talk. During our break, I respected Harper's request for space. I didn't call or text her, didn't show up at her parents' house, and tried to give her the time she said she needed to figure things out. Last week, I ran into Harper's best friend Ashley at the grocery store. Ashley seemed uncomfortable when she saw me and tried to avoid making conversation, but something about her behaviour made me press for information about how Harper was doing. Ashley reluctantly told me that Harper was doing well and seemed happy. When I asked what she meant by happy, Ashley looked like she wanted to disappear. She said she thought I already knew, then realised I didn't. That's when Ashley told me that Harper had gotten engaged to someone else. Not only engaged, but engaged to someone she'd apparently been seeing for months while we were still together. I felt like the world had stopped spinning. I asked Ashley to repeat what she'd just said, hoping I'd misunderstood, but she confirmed that Harper was engaged to a guy named Trevor, whom she'd met through work. Ashley explained that Harper and Trevor had been secretly dating for at least 4 months, maybe longer. They'd gotten engaged the week after Harper had asked me for a break, and they were planning a quick wedding for next month. I asked Ashley why Harper hadn't just broken up with me, instead of asking for a break, while she was seeing someone else. Ashley said Harper had been scared to hurt me, and thought a gradual separation would be easier for everyone. The betrayal was staggering. While I'd been planning our future and dealing with typical pre-wedding stress, Harper had been building a relationship with another man. The break hadn't been about figuring out her feelings for me. It had been about buying time to solidify her relationship with Trevor. I immediately called Harper and demanded an explanation. At first she tried to deny Ashley's story, but when I pressed for details she admitted everything. Harper said she'd met Trevor at a work conference 6 months ago and had felt an immediate connection with him. She claimed she'd tried to ignore her feelings, but they'd grown stronger over time. She explained that she'd started questioning our relationship after meeting Trevor, wondering if what we had was really love. or just comfort and familiarity. She said Trevor made her feel excited and alive in ways she hadn't felt in years. When I asked why she hadn't just broken up with me instead of cheating, Harper said she hadn't been sure about Trevor initially and didn't want to throw away our relationship for something that might not work out. She'd apparently been dating both of us simultaneously for months, trying to figure out which relationship she wanted to pursue. The break had been her way of testing whether she missed me or felt relieved to be away from our relationship. Harper admitted that during our break, she and Trevor had gotten much more serious. He'd proposed after just a few weeks of her being single, and she'd said yes because everything felt right with him in ways it hadn't with me. Our F-next story comes from someone who learned that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the biggest meaning. My crush surprised me at work with coffee after a rough day. I work at this tiny bookstore downtown, the kind with creaky floors and cats that wander between the shelves. It's usually pretty quiet, which I love, but last Tuesday was absolutely brutal. We had 3 different customers yell at me about books we didn't have in stock. The register crashed twice, and I accidentally knocked over an entire display of bestsellers. By the time my shift was almost over, I was ready to crawl under the counter and stay there. I was reorganizing the fiction section for the 3rd time that day when I heard the little bell above the door chime. I didn't look up right away because honestly, I couldn't handle another difficult customer. But then I heard this familiar voice saying my name, and when I turned around, there was Lila. Lila works at the marketing firm across the street. We've been friends since college, but over the past few months, I've developed the most ridiculous crush on her. She has this way of lighting up a room just by walking into it, and her laugh could probably cure depression. The problem is, she's so far out of my league that I've never even considered making a move. She was standing by the door, holding 2 coffee cups and wearing this soft smile that made my heart do weird things. "Rough day?" she asked, walking over to where I was still crouched next to the fallen books. "How did you know?" I asked, probably looking like a complete mess with my hair sticking up and dust all over my apron. "I could see you through the window," she said, handing me one of the cups. "You looked like you needed some reinforcement." I took the cup and nearly dropped it when I saw what was written on the side. Not only had she remembered my exact order, a medium oat milk latte with an extra shot and cinnamon, but she'd written a little note on the cup in her neat handwriting. "Bad days don't last, but good people do. You're one of the good ones." I just stood there staring at the cup, trying not to tear up in front of her. "Lila, you didn't have to do this." "I know," she said, settling down on the floor next to me and starting to help stack the books I'd been reorganizing. "But I wanted to, plus I was getting coffee anyway, and I figured you probably hadn't had a chance to grab any today." She was right. I'd been so busy dealing with chaos that I hadn't eaten or had anything to drink since my morning coffee at 6 a.m. We sat there on the bookstore floor, drinking our lattes and talking about everything except my terrible day. She told me about this new campaign she was working on, and I told her about the book I'd been reading during slow moments. What struck me most wasn't just that she'd brought me coffee, but that she'd paid attention. She knew I always got oat milk instead of regular milk because of my lactose intolerance. She knew I needed that extra shot to function as a human being. She even knew I always asked for cinnamon on top, which is such a small detail that most people would never remember. When she finally had to leave to get back to work, she squeezed my hand and said, "Tomorrow will be better." And you know what? She was right. Not just because the next day was objectively less chaotic, but because every time I looked at that coffee cup, which I definitely kept, I was reminded that someone cared enough to notice when I was having a hard time. That story is over. Sometimes the most romantic gestures aren't grand declarations or expensive gifts. Sometimes it's just someone paying attention to the little things and showing up exactly when you need them most. The fact that she remembered every detail of his coffee order and took time out of her day to bring him comfort speaks volumes about the kind of person she is. Speaking of paying attention to details, our next story comes from someone who discovered that sometimes what we interpret as disinterest is actually the complete opposite. I thought my crush didn't like me until they admitted they were just nervous. I met Milo during orientation week at college. He was in my statistics class, and I noticed him immediately because he had this incredible smile and was wearing a vintage band t-shirt for a group I'd never heard anyone else our age even mention. I figured we'd have stuff in common, so I tried to strike up conversations with him before and after class. But every time I approached him, he'd get weird. Not rude weird, just awkward weird. He'd give me these short clipped answers and then find an excuse to leave quickly. If I asked him about the homework, he'd mumble something about not understanding it and hurry away. If I complimented his shirt or his sneakers, he'd just nod and suddenly remember he had to be somewhere else. After a few weeks of this, I started to get the message. Clearly, he wasn't interested in being friends, let alone anything more. I was disappointed because he seemed really cool from a distance, but I wasn't going to keep bothering someone who obviously didn't want to talk to me. So I stopped trying. The thing is, I still saw him around campus all the time. We had 2 classes together, and our dorms were in the same quad. Every time our eyes met, he'd look away quickly, which just confirmed my theory that he found me annoying. I started sitting on the opposite side of the classroom and taking different routes to avoid making him uncomfortable. This went on for almost 2 months. I'd basically written him off as a lost cause and started focusing my attention on making other friends. Then one day, I was studying alone in the library when he appeared at my table, looking absolutely miserable. "Can I sit here?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. I was so surprised that I just nodded. He sat down and stared at his hands for a long moment before finally looking up at me. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, "and probably an explanation." I had no idea what he was talking about, so I just waited for him to continue. "I know you've been trying to be friendly, and I've been acting like a complete weirdo," he said, running his hands through his hair. "It's not because I don't like you, it's actually the opposite problem." My brain took a second to process what he was saying. "Opposite problem? I have the biggest crush on you," he said, turning red as he spoke. "Have had since the first day of class. And every time you try to talk to me, I panic because I'm afraid I'm going to say something stupid and ruin any chance I might have." I just stared at him. All this time I'd thought he found me irritating, when actually he'd been nervous because he liked me. So instead of risking saying something dumb, he continued, I just say nothing and hurry away, which now that I'm saying it out loud, was probably way stupider than anything I might have accidentally said. I started laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was such a relief. "Milo, I thought you hated me." "Hate you?" He looked genuinely shocked. "How could you think that?" "Because every time I tried to talk to you, you acted like I had the plague." He covered his face with his hands. "Oh God, I'm such an idiot." "You're not an idiot," I said, still smiling. "You're just overthinking things. I've been wanting to get to know you better this whole time." He peeked at me through his fingers. "Really?" "Really. And for the record, I don't think you would have said anything stupid. You seem pretty smart to me." We ended up talking for 3 hours in that library. Turned out we had way more in common than just music taste. He was funny and thoughtful and had all these interesting perspectives on things. When we finally parted ways, he asked if I wanted to study together again sometime. "I'd like that," I said. "And Milo, next time you're nervous about talking to someone, maybe just try talking anyway. The worst thing that can happen is you'll find out you were worried about nothing." He grinned, and it was that same incredible smile that had caught my attention on the first day. I'll try to remember that. That story is over. It's amazing how our own insecurities can create completely false narratives about other people's feelings. Milo spent months avoiding the person he liked most because he was afraid of rejection, while she spent those same months thinking he couldn't stand her. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just be honest about how you feel. Our next story proves that love isn't always about grand romantic gestures. Sometimes it's about showing up when it matters most. My crush drove 2 hours just to see my graduation. College graduation was supposed to be this huge milestone, but honestly, I wasn't feeling particularly celebratory about it. My family lives on the opposite coast, and flights were expensive, so none of them could make it. My closest friends had graduated the semester before, so they weren't walking with me. I was basically going to be sitting alone in a sea of graduates, watching everyone else get cheered for by their loved ones, while I clapped for myself. I'd been texting back and forth with Hannah about how weird it felt to have such a big moment with no one there to share it. Hannah and I had met during a summer internship program the year before. She went to school about 2 hours north of me, and we'd stayed in touch through social media and occasional texts. I had the biggest crush on her, but she lived far enough away that we'd only hung out in person a handful of times. She'd been really sweet about the whole graduation thing, sending me encouraging messages and telling me how proud she was of me for finishing my degree. But I figured that was just her being a good friend. I wasn't expecting anything more than maybe a congratulatory text on the day of. The morning of graduation, I was getting ready in my tiny apartment, trying to psych myself up for sitting alone at my own ceremony. I put on my cap and gown, took a few selfies to send to my parents, and headed over to the campus centre where we were supposed to line up. The ceremony itself was pretty standard. Long speeches, lots of names being called, the usual pomp and circumstance. When they called my name, I walked across the stage, shook hands with the dean, and smiled for the photographer. I could hear polite applause from the audience, but it was that generic clapping you get from strangers who are really just waiting for their own person's name to be called. After the ceremony ended, I was walking back toward the parking lot, already planning to go home and order pizza to celebrate alone, when I heard someone shouting my name. Not just calling it, but really yelling it with enthusiasm. I turned around and couldn't believe what I saw. There was Hannah, pushing through the crowd of families and graduates, waving her arms above her head and grinning like crazy. "You did it," she yelled, throwing her arms around me in a hug that nearly knocked me over. "I'm so proud of you." I was so shocked I could barely speak. "Hannah, what are you doing here? How are you here?" "I drove down this morning," she said, still beaming. "I couldn't let you graduate without someone there to cheer for you." "You drove 2 hours just for this?" "Of course I did. This is huge. You worked so hard for this degree." I found out later that she'd gotten up at 5 in the morning to make the drive down. She'd had to skip her own classes for the day. She'd even brought a little bouquet of flowers from the grocery store near her campus. "I sat in the back row," she explained, as we walked toward the parking lot together. "I was cheering so loud that the people around me probably thought I was your mum or something." The thought of Hannah sitting by herself in a crowd of strangers, cheering enthusiastically for someone she'd only known for a year, made me feel things I wasn't sure how to process. "Why would you do all this for me?" I asked. She stopped walking and looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. "Because you matter to me," she said simply. "Because big moments should be shared with people who care about you, and because I wanted to be here." We ended up going to lunch together at this little diner off campus. She insisted on paying because she said it was a celebration. We talked for hours about everything: graduation, our plans after college, random memories from our internship. When it was finally time for her to drive back, I walked her to her car. "Thank you," I said as she was getting ready to leave. "This meant more to me than you know." "I'm glad I could be here," she said. "And hey, when I graduate next month, you better be there cheering embarrassingly loud for me." "I wouldn't miss it," I promised. She did graduate the next month, and I absolutely was there, cheering loud enough that security probably thought there was some kind of disturbance. But that's a story for another day. That story's over. There's something so powerful about someone choosing to show up for you, especially when they have no obligation to do so. Hannah didn't just send a congratulatory text or a card. She rearranged her entire day, drove 4 hours round trip, and sat alone in a crowd of strangers just to make sure one person didn't have to celebrate alone. Sometimes technology works against us in relationships, but our next story shows how even our digital mistakes can lead to something beautiful. I accidentally left my crush on red for a week, and they still asked me out. I am notoriously bad at responding to texts. Not because I don't care about people, but because I have this weird anxiety about saying the wrong thing in written form. I'll read a message, start typing a response, delete it, type something else, delete that too, and then somehow convince myself I'll come up with the perfect response later. Then later never comes, and suddenly it's been 3 days and responding feels even more awkward than it did initially. This character flaw of mine reached peak embarrassment levels when it happened with Rory. Rory was someone I'd met through mutual friends at a house party a few months earlier. We'd spent most of that night talking on the back porch about books and travel and random philosophical questions. I'd gone home that night with a massive crush and their number in my phone. We'd been texting sporadically for a few weeks, just casual conversation, but I was always stressed about every message I sent. I'd overthink everything, analysing their responses for hidden meanings and crafting my replies like I was writing diplomatic treaties. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Rory sent me a message that made my heart stop. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a simple, "Hey, I've been thinking about our conversation about that book series you recommended. Would you want to grab coffee sometime this weekend and tell me more about it?" I stared at that message for probably 10 minutes. This was it. This was them asking me out, or at least asking me to hang out in a way that felt like it could be a date. I needed to respond with something perfect, something that showed I was interested but not desperate, enthusiastic but not overwhelming. I typed out about 15 different responses. "I'd love to." He sounded too eager. "Sure, that sounds fun," seemed too casual. "Absolutely. When works for you?" Felt too formal. Everything I wrote sounded wrong in my head. So I did what I always do when I can't figure out the right words. I told myself I'd respond later when I could think more clearly. I closed the message and went back to whatever I'd been doing, promising myself I'd craft the perfect response within a few hours. Those few hours turned into a day. That day turned into 3 days. By the time I realised how long it had been, I was in full panic mode. How do you respond to someone after leaving them on read for half a week? What do you even say? "Sorry, I was busy crafting the perfect response to your casual coffee invitation, and somehow forgot to actually send any response at all." I kept telling myself I'd figure out how to fix it tomorrow. Tomorrow became the next day, and suddenly it had been an entire week. A week. I had left someone on read for 7 full days after they'd asked me out. I was convinced I'd completely ruined whatever chance I might have had. Rory probably thought I was either completely uninterested or just plain rude. I started seeing them around campus and felt sick with embarrassment every time. I was sure they hated me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided I had to say something, even if it was just to apologise for being such a disaster. I spent an entire evening crafting what was essentially a formal apology text, explaining my anxiety about responding and acknowledging how rude I'd been. Before I could send my novel-length explanation, though, my phone buzzed with a new message from Rory. "So I'm guessing you're either dead, or you saw my message and panicked about how to respond. Either way, I'm concerned. If you're dead, please confirm. If you panicked, the answer I was looking for was just yes or no, and I promise I won't judge you for taking a week to work up the courage to pick one." I laughed out loud when I read it, partly from relief and partly from amazement that they'd read the situation so perfectly. I immediately called instead of texting back. When Rory answered, I could hear the smile in their voice. "So you're not dead," they said. "Definitely not dead," I confirmed. Just mortified. About what? Taking a week to respond to a simple question? Yes! I can't believe I left you hanging like that. I kept trying to think of the perfect thing to say, and then somehow never said anything at all. Rory laughed, and it was such a warm, understanding sound. "You know, I figured that's what happened. You seem like someone who would overthink a text message. Is that obvious?" "A little, but it's also kind of endearing. Most people would have just said yes or no immediately, without putting any thought into it. So you're not mad?" "Mad? No, amused, definitely, and still waiting for an answer to my question." "Yes," I said quickly. "The answer is yes. I would love to get coffee with you this weekend." "Great. And just so you know, if you ever panic about how to respond to me again, Just send me a thumbs up emoji or something. I promise I'll understand. I'll keep that in mind. Oh, and one more thing. I guess I'll forgive you for the week of radio silence if we get dinner too. You know, to make up for lost time. That story is over. The fact that Rory not only understood the overthinking spiral, but found it endearing enough to ask for a second activity shows incredible emotional intelligence and patience. Sometimes the people worth being with are the ones who see your quirks and anxieties and choose to work with them rather than around them. Our next story shows that sometimes the most romantic moments happen when someone puts real effort into learning something new, just for you. My crush learned my favourite song on guitar and played it for me. I've always been a music person. I'm that girl who has Spotify playlists for every possible mood and situation. Road trip music, rainy day vibes, songs for when you're feeling existential at 2 a.m, you name it. Music is basically the soundtrack to my life, and anyone who knows me well knows that. Elena and I met in our college environmental science program. She was one of those people who seemed naturally good at everything. Brilliant in class discussions, organised with her research, just generally had her life together in a way that made me slightly envious. We'd been study partners for about a semester, spending long hours in the library working through problem sets and preparing for exams. During one of our marathon study sessions, she asked me what I listened to while I worked. I ended up showing her my entire music library, explaining why certain songs fit certain moods, geeking out about lyrics and melodies. She seemed genuinely interested, asking questions about artists I mentioned and taking notes like it was part of our coursework. There was one song in particular that I kept coming back to. It was this beautiful acoustic piece by a folk artist most people hadn't heard of. The lyrics were poetic without being pretentious, and the guitar work was intricate, but not overwhelming. I'd probably played it for Elena 3 or 4 times during different study sessions, explaining why it was perfect background music for reading dense research papers. "I can see why you love it," she'd said after listening to it again. "It's like audio comfort food." A few weeks later, our program organised this end-of-semester bonfire at a state park about an hour from campus. Most of our class was there, sitting around the fire, making s'mores, and just decompressing after finals. Someone had brought a guitar, and people were taking turns playing songs they knew. Elena had been quiet most of the evening, which wasn't unusual for her in big groups, but when the guitar made its way around the circle to her, she didn't pass it along like I expected her to. "I learned something recently," she said, looking directly at me across the fire. "I'm not sure I'll do it justice, but I wanted to try." Then she started playing my song. Not just the basic chords, but the actual finger-picking pattern, the little embellishments, all the subtle details that made the original so special. Her voice was softer than the recording, more intimate, but it was perfect for the setting. I felt my heart stop. Everyone around the fire had gone quiet, listening to this beautiful performance, but Eleanor's eyes stayed on me the entire time. It was like she was playing for an audience of one, even though 20 other people were sitting there. When she finished, there was this moment of complete silence before everyone started applauding. But I couldn't focus on anyone else's reaction because I was too busy processing what had just happened. After the song ended and the guitar moved on to the next person, Elena came over and sat on the log next to me. "How long have you been learning that?" I asked, still a little stunned. "About 3 weeks," she admitted. "I found guitar tabs online and watched YouTube tutorials until I figured it out. My roommate probably wanted to strangle me because I kept practicing the same sections over and over." "You learned my favourite song just to play it for me." She looked suddenly shy, which was so unlike her usual confident demeanour. "I wanted to give you something. You light up when you talk about music, and I thought, maybe if I could play something that meant something to you, it would mean something to you that I played it." "Elena, that was incredible. I can't believe you put that much effort into learning something just because I liked it." "It wasn't just because you liked it," she said quietly. "It was because you liked it, and I like you." The The way she said it was so simple and honest that it took my breath away. No dramatic declarations, no overthinking, just a straightforward statement of fact. "I like you too," I said. "Have for months, actually." "Good," she said, smiling that confident smile I was used to seeing from her, because I was really hoping that 3 weeks of guitar practice would pay off. We ended up talking by the fire until almost everyone else had gone home. She told me about how she'd been trying to work up the courage to tell me how she felt for weeks, and how learning my song had seemed like the perfect way to show rather than tell. "Plus," she added with a grin, "now I know how to play guitar. That's a useful skill to have." That story is over. Learning an entire song on a new instrument just to impress someone takes dedication, but doing it with their favourite song that most people have never heard of, that's next level thoughtfulness. The fact that she spent 3 weeks practicing something she'd never shown any interest in before shows how much attention she'd been paying to what mattered to her crush. Sometimes, love stories aren't about meeting someone new, but about finally seeing someone who's been there all along in a different light. My crush was my childhood friend, and we finally got together. Theo and I grew up 3 houses apart on the same quiet suburban street. Our mums were best friends, so we'd been thrown together at playdates since we were basically toddlers. We went through all the typical childhood phases together, building blanket forts, having water balloon fights, complaining about homework. The whole suburban kid experience. Through elementary school, we were just friends. Good friends, but friends in that uncomplicated way kids can be before everything gets weird and confusing. We'd ride our bikes around the neighbourhood, play video games in his basement, and scheme ways to convince our parents to let us stay up later on weekends. Middle school was when things started getting awkward, not between us specifically, just in general. Everyone was figuring out this whole puberty thing, forming cliquies and suddenly caring about who liked whom. Theo and I stayed close, but there was this new awareness that we were a boy and a girl hanging out all the time, and apparently that meant something different now. High school was worse. We went to the same school, but we started moving in slightly different circles. He got into theatre and student government. I focused on art classes and joined the debate team. We'd still hang out sometimes, but it wasn't the same easy friendship we'd had as kids. There was this underlying tension I couldn't quite name. I started dating other people. So did he. But somehow, whenever I was with someone else, I'd find myself comparing them to Theo. They weren't as funny as him. They didn't get my weird sense of humour the way he did. They didn't know all my family stories and inside jokes. After graduation, we went to different colleges several states apart. We kept in touch through social media and occasional texts, but it was that surface level keeping up that happens when life takes you in different directions. I'd see his posts about college parties and internships, and he'd like my photos from art classes and study abroad trips. When we both came home for winter break during our junior year, our mums orchestrated one of their famous coincidental meetings at the local coffee shop. I hadn't seen Theo in person in over a year, and I was nervous for reasons I couldn't quite explain. He looked different, taller, more confident, but still fundamentally the same person who used to help me catch fireflies in mason jars. We fell back into conversation like no time had passed at all, talking about school and plans for after graduation, and whether our old elementary school still had that creaky swing set we used to fight over. "Want to take a walk around the old neighbourhood?" he suggested, after we'd been talking for 2 hours. We ended up at the playground, where we'd spent countless afternoons as kids. It was smaller than I remembered, but the same swing set was still there, creaky as ever. "Can I tell you something?" Theo said as we sat on the swings, gently rocking back and forth. "Of course." "I had the biggest crush on you in middle school," he said, staring at his feet. "Like, embarrassingly huge. I used to practice what I'd say if I ever worked up the courage to ask you to the spring dance." I stopped swinging and looked at him. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. I was convinced you saw me as just a friend though, so I never said anything." Then high school happened and we started dating other people, and I figured I'd missed my chance. Theo, I said slowly, I had a crush on you too. In middle school, in high school, probably in college if I'm being honest. He looked up at me with this expression of complete surprise. Really? Really? I always thought you were out of my league though. You were so involved in everything, so popular. I was just your weird neighbour friend who drew too much and argued with everyone. You were never just anything, he said seriously. You were the person I looked forward to seeing every day. You were the person I told everything to. You were my favourite person. Were? He smiled, and it was the same smile I'd been seeing across the fence between our backyards for 15 years. You're still my favourite person. I don't know who moved first, but suddenly we were kissing on the same playground, where we'd probably had our first fight over who got to go down the big slide first. So, I said when we finally broke apart, what happens now? Well, Theo said, I graduate in 6 months and I've been looking at jobs in your city. Purely coincidental, of course. Of course, I agreed, grinning. And maybe, he continued, we could try this thing where we actually tell each other how we feel instead of spending another 15 years wondering what if. That sounds like a revolutionary concept, I said. We're long distance for now, but it's different than any long distance relationship I've ever heard of. Because even though we're states apart, in a lot of ways, Theo has never felt closer. He's the person who knows all my stories because he was there for most of them. He's the person who understands my family dynamics because his family has been intertwined with mine since before either of us could walk. Sometimes the best relationships are the ones that grow slowly, over years of friendship and shared history, until one day you realise that the person you've been looking for has been right there all along. That story is over. There's something magical about realising your best friend was meant to be more all along. All those years of thinking they were out of reach when they were probably thinking the same thing about you. The playground setting for their first kiss is perfect, full circle from childhood friendship to adult love. Our next story proves that sometimes academic settings can lead to the most unexpected romantic connections. I had a crush on my tutor, and she ended up becoming my girlfriend. I've never been great at chemistry, not the romantic kind, the actual science. Atoms and molecules and chemical equations just never clicked for me the way other subjects did. So when I was struggling through organic chemistry my sophomore year, I knew I needed help. The tutoring centre at our university matched students with peer tutors who'd already aced the classes you were struggling with. I filled out the request form, expecting to get paired with some super serious pre-med student who'd spend an hour drilling me on molecular structures and then send me on my way. Instead, I got Ava. Ava was a senior chemistry major with this incredibly warm smile and an ability to explain complex concepts in ways that actually made sense. She had dark curly hair that she always wore pulled back in a messy bun, and she had this habit of doodling molecular structures in the margins of her notebooks when she was thinking. Our first tutoring session was supposed to be an hour. We ended up talking for almost 3 hours. She was patient with my questions, even the ones I was embarrassed to ask because they seemed so basic. More than that, she made chemistry feel less like this impossible foreign language and more like a puzzle I could actually solve. "You're not stupid," she said, after I apologised for the 5th time for not understanding something immediately. Chemistry is hard. It's like learning to think in a completely different way. Some people pick it up quickly, others need more time to let it sink in. There's nothing wrong with being in the second group. I started looking forward to our twice-weekly sessions more than I probably should have. Ava was funny and smart, and had this way of making even the most boring topics seem interesting. She'd tell me stories about her research projects, or share random chemistry facts that had nothing to do with our coursework, but everything to do with why she loved the subject. The thing is, I was definitely developing feelings for her that went way beyond academic appreciation. The way she'd lean over to look at my work, close enough that I could smell her vanilla shampoo. The way she'd get excited when I finally grasped a concept I'd been struggling with. The way she'd pack up her materials slowly at the end of each session, like she wasn't quite ready for our time to be over either. But she was my tutor. She was older than me, more accomplished academically, and probably just being nice because it was literally her job to help me succeed. I convinced myself that anything I was reading into our interactions was just wishful thinking on my part. Midway through the semester, I was finally starting to understand the material. My quiz grades were improving, and I felt confident enough to attempt homework problems without immediately panicking. During one of our sessions, Ava looked at my latest assignment and grinned. "You know what this means?" she said, holding up my paper with a big red A at the top. "That I'm not completely hopeless at chemistry. It means you probably don't need a tutor anymore," she said. "You've got this figured out." My heart sank. I hadn't considered that success in chemistry might mean the end of my time with Ava. "Oh yeah, I guess you're right." She must have noticed my less than enthusiastic response because she tilted her head and studied my face. "You don't seem happy about that." "I am happy about understanding chemistry," I said carefully. "It's just, I've really enjoyed our sessions. You're a great teacher." "Just a great teacher?" she asked, and there was something in her tone that made me look up at her more closely. "What do you mean?" Ava set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "Can I tell you something that might be slightly inappropriate given our tutoring arrangement?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I only signed up to be a tutor because I wanted to meet you," she said. "I'd seen you around campus for months, and when I saw your name on the tutoring request list, I specifically asked to be assigned to you." I stared at her. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. I was hoping that if I helped you with chemistry, maybe I'd get a chance to get to know you better." Which worked, obviously, but now I'm in this weird position where our academic relationship is ending, just when I was working up the courage to ask if you wanted to try a different kind of relationship. "You were going to ask me out?" "I was going to try," she said, smiling shyly, "but I wasn't sure if you saw me as anything more than your helpful tutor who explains electron configurations." "Ava," I said, "I've been hoping you'd ask me out since our second session. I just didn't think someone like you would be interested in someone like me." Someone like me? Smart, accomplished, beautiful, way out of my league. She laughed, and it was such a happy sound. "First of all, leagues are made up. Second of all, you're smart too. You just needed someone to explain things in a way that made sense to you. And third, I've been hoping you'd ask me out since our first session." "Really? Really? So now that we've established that we're both interested and you don't need academic help anymore, would you like to go on an actual date? Somewhere that doesn't involve molecular diagrams?" "I'd love that," I said, "but I have to ask, if I start struggling with chemistry again, does that mean I get more tutoring sessions?" She grinned. "I think we can work something out. That story's over." The fact that she specifically requested to tutor him because she'd noticed him around campus is adorable. Sometimes the best way to get close to someone is to find an excuse to spend time with them, even if it involves teaching organic chemistry. Who knew molecular structures could be so romantic? Our next story shows how sometimes the people who help us during transitions end up transitioning into something much more meaningful. My crush helped me move houses and left a note in one of the boxes. Moving is literally the worst. I don't care what anyone says about fresh starts and new beginnings. The actual process of packing up your entire life and transporting it to a different location is pure torture. So when I had to move out of my college apartment and into a new place across town, I was dreading every second of it. I'd mentioned my upcoming move to a few people, mostly just complaining about how much stuff I'd somehow accumulated in 2 years of dorm and apartment living. Ollie, who I'd been nursing a crush on for months, overheard me talking about it in the campus coffee shop. "You need help moving?" he asked, appearing at my table with his usual easy smile. "Oh, you don't have to do that," I said quickly. "It's going to be a whole nightmare situation, with stairs and heavy furniture, and probably a lot of swearing." "Sounds like my kind of Saturday," he said. "What time should I be there?" I tried to protest, but Ollie was insistent. He showed up at my old apartment that weekend with work gloves, a dolly he'd borrowed from somewhere, and enough energy to put my exhausted, overwhelmed self to shame. He was incredible, Not only did he lift all the heavy stuff I'd been dreading, but he actually made the whole process fun. He'd narrate our progress like a sports commentator, make jokes about my questionable decorating choices, and somehow turn the most stressful day I'd had in months into something that felt almost like hanging out. "Why do you have 17 different coffee mugs for one person?" he asked, carefully wrapping each one in newspaper. "Different mugs for different moods," I explained, probably sounding ridiculous. "Ah yes, the essential Tuesday morning versus Thursday afternoon. Mug distinction. Very important. By the end of the day, we'd successfully transported everything from my old place to my new one. Ollie helped me arrange the furniture, hung pictures where I couldn't reach, and even helped me unpack the kitchen boxes. I ordered pizza as a thank you, and we sat on my floor eating it surrounded by boxes and feeling accomplished. "I can't believe you spent your entire Saturday helping me move," I said. "You're amazing." "It was fun," he said, and he actually seemed to mean it. "Plus, now I know where you live, so I can bother you whenever I want." After he left, I spent the evening slowly unpacking boxes and trying to make the new place feel like home. I was working through a box of books when I found a folded piece of paper tucked between two novels. My name was written on the outside in Ollie's handwriting. I opened it and found a note that made my heart skip several beats. "Hope this box isn't the only thing you open up to me. Thanks for letting me help today. Your new place is going to be perfect because you're in it. P.S. I may have left my diet." I read the note 3 times before it fully heart in one of these boxes too. So let me know if you fiend sank in. Ollie hadn't just helped me move out of kindness. He'd been looking for a way to spend time with me, to show me how he felt, and apparently to leave the sweetest, cheesiest note in human history, where I'd eventually find it. I called him immediately, not caring that it was almost midnight. "Did you find something interesting in your unpacking?" he answered, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Ollie, this note," I said, holding it like it was made of gold. "Too cheesy." I debated whether to include the heart part, but I figured if I was going for it, I might as well really go for it. "It's perfect," I said, "but I have to tell you, I think I found your heart." "Yeah? Where was it?" "Right here with mine." There was a pause, and then Ollie laughed, warm and happy. "So, does this mean I get to come over and help you unpack more boxes?" "Only if you promise to leave more notes." "Deal. But next time I'm writing them on the outside of the boxes, so you don't have to work so hard to find them." That story is over. The fact that he spent an entire day doing manual labour just to spend time with her, and then left the most adorable note hidden where she'd find it later, shows serious romantic planning skills. Sometimes love is less about grand gestures and more about showing up with work gloves and a borrowed dolly. Speaking of unexpected encounters, our next story proves that sometimes the universe has been waiting years to give you a second chance. I thought my crush didn't remember me from school, but they did. I have a terrible habit of assuming I'm forgettable. Not in a self-pitying way, just in a realistic way. I'm pretty average looking, I'm not particularly outgoing, and I tend to blend into crowds. So when I ran into Iris at a bookstore downtown, 5 years after we graduated high school, I figured she'd have no idea who I was. Iris had been one of those people in high school who seemed to exist in a completely different social stratosphere than me. She was in theatre, student government, honour society, basically every activity that required confidence and charisma. I was more of a library-dwelling, art class-focused type, who knew everyone's name but rarely spoke up in groups. I'd had the most ridiculous crush on her throughout junior and senior year. She had this incredible laugh that you could hear from across the hallway, and she was kind to literally everyone, even the weird kids like me who mostly kept to themselves. But I never imagined she'd even noticed I existed. So when I was browsing the poetry section at this little independent bookstore and heard someone say my name, I turned around expecting to see a former classmate I'd actually been friends with. Instead, there was Iris, looking exactly like herself, but somehow more polished, more grown up. "Oh wow, hi," I said, probably looking as surprised as I felt. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I come here all the time," she said, smiling that same warm smile I remembered from high school. I can't believe I finally ran into you. I've been hoping to see you around town for years. That caught me off guard. You have? Of course I have. I always wondered what happened to you after graduation. You just disappeared. I almost laughed at that. I didn't disappear. I just went to community college and kept a pretty low profile. I figured most people from high school wouldn't really remember me anyway. Iris looked genuinely shocked. Are you kidding? You were one of the most interesting people in our class. I always wanted to talk to you more, but you seemed so self-contained. Like you had this whole rich inner life that you didn't need to share with anyone. That's a very generous way of describing socially awkward, I said. You weren't socially awkward, you were selective. There's a difference. She paused, looking almost nervous for the first time in the conversation. Can I tell you something that might sound weird? Sure. I had such a crush on you in high school. I used to try to time my trips to my locker so I'd walk past the art room when you were working on projects. I loved watching you draw because you get this completely focused expression, like nothing else in the world existed. I stared at her. You're not serious? You're completely serious. I always meant to say something, but you seemed so absorbed in your own world. I didn't want to bother you. Plus, I figured someone as creative and thoughtful as you probably thought I was just another loud theatre kid. Iris, I said slowly, I had a huge crush on you too. Have had since junior year. Had? I felt my face get warm. Have. Definitely still have. She grinned, and it was like being 17 again, except this time I actually had the courage to have this conversation. So, she said, now that we've established we spent 2 years of high school both having crushes on each other without either of us saying anything, what do we do about it now? Well, I said, I was just about to grab coffee after I finished browsing here. Want to join me? I thought you'd never ask, she said. I've literally been waiting 5 years for this invitation. We ended up talking for 4 hours at the coffee shop, catching up on everything we'd done since graduation, and filling in all the gaps we'd missed by being too shy to talk to each other in high school. She told me about her theatre degree and her job at a local non-profit. I told her about my art and my plans to go back to school for graphic design. You know what's funny? Iris said, as we were finally getting ready to leave. I used to imagine what it would be like to have conversations like this with you, just sitting somewhere quiet, talking about books and art and life. This is better than anything I imagined. Even better than your 17-year-old fantasy version. So much better. Because now we're both brave enough to actually say what we're thinking. That story's over. The idea that they spent 2 years of high school both crushing on each other from a distance, only to finally connect 5 years later in a bookstore, feels like something straight out of a romantic comedy. Sometimes timing isn't about being in the right place at the right time. It's about being ready to be vulnerable enough to speak up. Our next story shows that persistence and subtle signals sometimes require a more direct approach to get the message across. My crush sat next to me every day until I finally asked them out. I'm not great at reading social cues. I wish I was one of those people who can instantly tell when someone is flirting with them, but I tend to assume that friendly behaviour is just that, friendly. This character flaw of mine almost cost me something incredible. I work at a graphic design firm downtown, and we have this open office layout with long tables instead of individual desks. When I started the job 6 months ago, I picked a spot near the window and settled into a routine of arriving early to claim the same seat every day. About 2 months into the job, this new designer named Finn started. He was talented, funny, and had this way of making even mundane client projects seem interesting. During his first week, he sat in different spots around the office, probably figuring out where he felt most comfortable. Then, in his second week, he started sitting next to me, every single day. He'd arrive with his coffee and laptop, scan the room full of available seats, and choose the empty chair directly to my right. At first I thought it was coincidental. Maybe he liked sitting by the window too. But as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, Finn consistently chose the seat next to mine, even when there were arguably better spots available. We'd chat throughout the day about work stuff, weekend plans, random observations about our co-workers. He was easy to talk to, and I found myself looking forward to our daily conversations. But I convinced myself that he was just being friendly with the person who happened to sit next to him. Finn would bring me coffee sometimes when he went to get his own. He'd ask for my opinion on design choices, even when he was perfectly capable of making those decisions himself. He'd stay late when I was working on tight deadlines, claiming he had his own work to finish, but mostly just keeping me company. My co-workers started making comments about it. "You two are attached at the hip," or "Where's your work husband today?" when Finn called in sick. I'd laugh it off and insist we were just friends, but privately, I was starting to hope it might be something more. The breakthrough moment came on a Friday afternoon when Finn didn't sit next to me. I'd arrived at my usual time to find him already at the office, but sitting clear across the room at a table near the conference rooms. I felt weirdly disappointed, like my day was already off to a wrong start. I kept glancing over at him throughout the morning, wondering if I'd done something to annoy him or if he'd finally gotten tired of our daily routine. He seemed normal during the team meeting, joking around and contributing ideas like always, but he stayed at his distant table. At lunch, I finally worked up the courage to ask him about it. "Everything okay?" I said, approaching his table. "You're sitting way over here today." Finn looked up from his laptop with this expression I couldn't quite read. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just thought I'd try a change of scenery." "Oh, okay. I just noticed because you've been sitting next to me for like 3 months straight." "You noticed that?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that made me pay closer attention. "Of course I noticed. We sit next to each other every day." "Right, but did you notice that I choose to sit next to you every day, even when there are other seats available? Even when sitting by the kitchen or near the printer would probably be more convenient?" I felt something click into place in my brain. "Finn, are you saying you've been deliberately sitting next to me this whole time?" "For 3 months, he confirmed. "I've been sitting next to you, bringing you coffee, staying late to keep you company, asking for your input on projects I could handle myself. I've been doing everything except skywriting 'I like you' above the office building." "Why are you sitting across the room today then?" He grinned, and it was part embarrassment, part amusement, because I was hoping you might miss me enough to come over here and ask me about it. Which you did, so I guess it worked. "That's incredibly manipulative," I said, but I was smiling too. "That's strategic," he corrected. "I was running out of subtle ways to show you I was interested. I figured maybe a less subtle approach might get better results." "Finn," I said, "do you want to go out sometime, like on a date?" His whole face lit up. "Took you long enough. You could have just asked me out 3 months ago, instead of playing the long game with strategic seating arrangements." "Where's the fun in that?" he said. "Besides, now I know you care enough about our daily routine to notice when it changes. That's valuable information. So you'll sit next to me again on Monday? Only if you promise to actually recognize it as flirting this time." That story is over. 3 months of strategic seating arrangements and coffee deliveries just to get someone to notice he was interested is dedication. Sometimes subtle doesn't work, and you need to literally change your entire routine to make someone realize they miss your presence. Points for creativity, even if it took forever. Our next story proves that sometimes our phones betray us in the most adorable ways possible. My crush accidentally sent me a text complaining about me, but it was cute. Technology has a way of exposing our most embarrassing moments at the worst possible times. Usually, this involves accidentally sending work emails to the wrong people or pocket dialing your ex. But sometimes, if you're really lucky, technology betrays you in a way that actually works out in your favour. I'd been working at this marketing startup for about 4 months when they hired Chloe for the social media position. She was creative, energetic, and had this infectious enthusiasm for even the most boring brand campaigns. We worked on different teams, so we didn't interact much beyond casual hallway conversations and team meetings. But I definitely noticed her. It was hard not to. She had this way of making presentations that should have been mind-numbing, actually entertaining, and she always wore these interesting vintage dresses that somehow looked both professional and artistic at the same time. We'd been assigned to work together on a campaign for a local restaurant, which meant spending more time in meetings and bouncing ideas off each other. Chloe was easy to work with, full of creative suggestions and always willing to iterate on concepts until we found something that clicked. During one particularly long afternoon meeting, we'd been going back and forth on tagline options for what felt like hours. I was getting tired and probably looked as drained as I felt. Chloe was still energetic, but I could tell she was getting a little punchy too because her suggestions were getting increasingly silly. "What about food so good? You'll forget your own name," she suggested with a completely straight face. "I don't think amnesia is the marketing angle we want to go for," I said, laughing despite my exhaustion. "Fair point. Food's so good. You'll remember your own name? That doesn't make any sense." "Nothing makes sense anymore," she said, dramatically flopping back in her chair. "We've been staring at these taglines for so long that words have lost all meaning." We finally called it a day around 6, both of us feeling like we'd made progress but needed to sleep on it before making final decisions. I was packing up my laptop when my phone buzzed with a text message. The message was from Chloe, but it clearly wasn't meant for me. It said, "Girl, why does he look so good today? Like, it's not fair. I'm trying to focus on taglines and he's just sitting there being all thoughtful and attractive, and I can't concentrate on anything." I read the message 3 times before it fully sank in. Chloe had obviously meant to text one of her friends about someone, but had accidentally sent it to me instead. The question was, who was she talking about? My first instinct was to let her know about the mix-up and pretend I hadn't read it, but something about the timing made me wonder. We'd just spent the afternoon working together, and she'd sent this message right after our meeting ended. Was there a chance she might have been talking about me? Before I could overthink it too much, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message clearly was meant for me. "Oh my God, please tell me you didn't just read that text I sent by accident." I stared at my phone, trying to decide how to respond. I could play dumb, pretend I hadn't seen it, save us both the embarrassment. Or I could take a chance. I typed back, "Depends, were you talking about me?" The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times, like she was typing and deleting responses. Finally, a message came through. "Maybe, was that obvious?" "Only because of the accidental text," I replied. "Otherwise, I never would have known." "Great, so I've been terrible at flirting for 4 months, and you had no idea I was interested until my phone betrayed me." "To be fair, I've been terrible at flirting too. I just assumed you were being friendly." "So where does this leave us?" she texted. Instead of responding, I walked back to her desk. She looked up when she saw me approaching, her face somewhere between embarrassed and hopeful. "It leaves us with me asking if you want to grab dinner," I said. "Since we never finished those taglines, we could call it a working dinner." "Is this your way of asking me out while maintaining plausible professional deniability?" she asked, grinning. "Maybe. Is it working?" "Definitely. But just so we're clear, this is a date, not actually a working dinner." "Good," I said, because I was planning to focus on how good you look today instead of taglines anyway. She laughed, and it was the same laugh that had been distracting me in meetings for months. My phone is never living this down, but I'm kinda grateful for the technical malfunction. "Me too, although next time you want to tell me I look good, you can just say it directly." "Where's the fun in that?" she said, echoing my earlier thoughts about strategic communication failures. "That story is over." The universe really said, these two need help with their communication, and decided to intervene through accidental text messages. Sometimes technology fails us, and sometimes it saves us from our own inability to just say what we're thinking. Thank goodness for misdirected texts and brave follow-up conversations. Our next story shows that even our most embarrassing moments can become the foundation for something beautiful. I dropped my lunch in front of my crush, and they helped me clean it up. Some days you wake up and just know it's going to be one of those days where everything goes wrong. Last Thursday was definitely one of those days. I'd overslept, spilled toothpaste on my shirt, and discovered I was out of coffee, all before 8 a.m. By the time I got to work, I was already feeling like the universe was personally conspiring against me. I work at this tech company with a really nice cafeteria, the kind with actual chefs and fresh ingredients instead of just vending machines and sad sandwiches. I usually pack my lunch to save money, but on days when I'm running late, I'll grab something from the cafeteria instead. That Thursday, I decided to treat myself to one of their fancy salad bowls, the kind with grilled chicken and avocado and all the toppings that make you feel like you're making healthy choices. I loaded it up with everything that looked good and headed to my usual table in the corner. That's when I saw Matteo. Matteo works in the product development department, which means our paths don't cross very often, but I'd been nursing a crush on him for months. He has this warm smile and always seems genuinely interested in whatever conversation he's having, whether it's about work stuff or just random small talk in the elevator. He was sitting alone at a table near the windows, reading something on his tablet while he ate. I'd been looking for an excuse to talk to him for weeks, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. I could casually walk past his table, maybe make a comment about how nice the weather looked, see if he wanted company. I was so focused on planning my casual approach that I wasn't paying attention to where I was walking. The cafeteria had just mopped the floors, and there was a wet spot right in front of Matteo's table that I didn't see until it was too late. My foot hit the slippery patch and I went down hard, arms flailing as I tried to catch my balance. The salad bowl went flying, launching its entire contents across the floor in a spectacular display of lettuce, chicken, and dressing. I landed on my knees in the middle of the mess, covered in ranch dressing, and feeling like I wanted to disappear into the floor. The cafeteria went quiet for a moment, that awful silence that happens when someone has a very public accident and everyone's trying not to stare. I was mortified, sitting there in a puddle of salad ingredients, probably red as a tomato. Then I heard Matteo's voice. "Are you okay? That looked like it hurt." I looked up to find him crouched down next to me, genuine concern on his face, instead of the amusement or second-hand embarrassment I'd been expecting. "I'm fine," I said, though I was pretty sure my knee was going to have a spectacular bruise. "Just my dignity that's injured." "Dignity is overrated," he said with a smile, standing up and offering me his hand. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up." He helped me to my feet and then, without being asked, started gathering up the scattered salad ingredients. Other people were starting to go back to their conversations and meals, but Matteo was completely focused on helping me deal with the aftermath of my spectacular wipeout. "You don't have to do this," I said, watching him collect pieces of lettuce with the same care most people reserve for important documents. "I know," he said, "but it's the right thing to do. Plus, this gives me an excuse to finally introduce myself properly. I'm Matteo." "I know who you are," I said, then immediately worried that sounded creepy. "I mean, we work in the same building. I've seen you around." "I've seen you around too," he said, grinning, usually looking much less covered in ranch dressing. A maintenance person appeared with a mop and some towels, and Matteo helped me get the worst of the mess cleaned off my clothes. I was still going to need to change my shirt, but at least I wasn't dripping salad dressing anymore. "I feel terrible that you missed your lunch helping me clean up my disaster," I said, as we threw away the last of the salad remnants. "Actually," Matteo said, "I was just thinking that this is the most interesting lunch break I've had in months, and I only ate half my sandwich anyway." He paused, then added, "Want to share it? I promise it's less likely to end up on the floor than a salad bowl." I laughed, and it felt good to laugh after such an embarrassing moment. "Are you sure you want to share your food with someone who clearly can't be trusted with lunch?" "I'm willing to take that risk," he said. "Besides, now I have a great story about how we met." "Well, she literally fell for me in the cafeteria." "That's terrible," I said, but I was smiling. "I know. I've been saving that joke up in case I ever got the chance to use it." We ended up splitting his sandwich and talking for the rest of lunch break. Matteo was even funnier and more interesting than I'd imagined from our brief elevator encounters. He told me about his work on product development and I told him about my projects in marketing. By the time we had to get back to work, I'd completely forgotten about my embarrassing fall. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, as we were throwing away our trash. "Only if you promise to warn me about any wet floors," I said. "Deal, but I'm buying you lunch. It's the least I can do after witnessing your battle with gravity." That story is over. Sometimes the most embarrassing moments of our lives turn into the best stories we have to tell. The fact that he didn't laugh at her disaster, but instead jumped in to help, shows exactly the kind of person he is. Plus, any guy who has "she literally fell for me" jokes ready to deploy is definitely boyfriend material. Our next story proves that confidence in the kitchen doesn't always translate to confidence in romance, but sometimes disasters make the best memories. I tried to impress my crush by cooking and set off the fire alarm. I've always been pretty confident in the kitchen. Not chef-level confident, but I can make a decent pasta dish, and my scrambled eggs are actually pretty good. So when Nina mentioned she'd never had homemade gnocchi, I saw an opportunity to show off a little. Nina and I had been friends for a few months, after meeting at a book club that neither of us really wanted to join, but both felt obligated to attend. She was smart and funny, and had this incredible way of analysing characters in novels that made me see stories in completely new ways. I'd been developing feelings for her for weeks, but couldn't figure out how to transition from book club acquaintances to something more. The gnocchi conversation happened after book club one Thursday evening. We were walking to our cars discussing the novel we'd just spent 2 hours dissecting, when she mentioned that she'd been craving Italian food all week. "I keep thinking about this gnocchi dish I had at a restaurant last month," she said, "but it was so expensive, and I have no idea how to make it myself." "I could make it for you," I said before my brain could stop my mouth. "I mean, if you want." I make pretty good gnocchi from scratch. This was only partially true. I'd made gnocchi exactly once following a YouTube tutorial, and it had turned out okay, but not spectacular. But Nina's face lit up with interest. "Really? You know how to make gnocchi from scratch?" "Absolutely," I said, doubling down on my overconfidence. "How about Saturday? I could cook dinner for you." She agreed immediately, and I spent the rest of the walk to my car mentally planning the perfect evening. Homemade gnocchi, a nice salad, maybe some garlic bread, candles, the whole romantic dinner setup. What could go wrong? Saturday afternoon, I went to the grocery store and bought enough ingredients to feed a small army. Potatoes for the gnocchi, fancy pasta sauce, salad ingredients, wine, even flowers for the table. I was determined to make this the kind of dinner that would transition us from friends to something more. I started cooking around 4, giving myself what I thought was plenty of time to have everything ready by 7, when Nina was supposed to arrive. The potatoes took longer to cook than I remembered, and then longer to cool down enough to handle. By the time I was actually making the gnocchi dough, I was already running behind schedule. The first batch of gnocchi turned out lumpy and misshapen, not at all like the elegant little pillows I'd envisioned. I decided to make another batch, which put me even further behind. By 6:30 I was stress cooking, flour everywhere, multiple pots going on the stove, trying to salvage what was rapidly becoming a disaster. That's when I made the crucial error. I put the garlic bread in the oven and then got distracted trying to fix the gnocchi sauce, which had somehow become too thick. I was stirring frantically, adding pasta water and hoping for the best, when I smelled something burning. The garlic bread wasn't just overdone, it was charcoal, and apparently I'd set the oven temperature too high because smoke was pouring out every time I opened the oven door. I grabbed the smoking bread with oven mitts, trying to wave away the smoke with a dish towel when the fire alarm started shrieking. The sound was deafening, and no amount of fanning with the dish towel would make it stop. I was standing in my kitchen, covered in flour, waving a towel at the ceiling like a maniac, when Nina knocked on my door. I opened the door, looking like I'd been through a natural disaster. Smoke still pouring out of my kitchen, fire alarm still wailing. Nina took one look at the chaos and started laughing. Not polite, trying to make me feel better laughing. Full on, doubled over, tears streaming down her face, laughing. "I'm so sorry," I shouted over the alarm. "This was supposed to be a nice dinner, and I completely destroyed everything." "This is amazing," she said, still laughing. "I have to help you." She pushed past me into the apartment, grabbed a chair from my dining room, and climbed up to disable the fire alarm. The sudden silence was almost as startling as the noise had been. "Okay," she said, surveying the chaos in my kitchen. "What can we salvage?" Together, we managed to rescue most of the gnocchi, which had actually turned out better than my first attempt. The sauce was fixable, and Nina found bread in my freezer that we could toast as a replacement for my charcoal experiment. She insisted on helping with everything, chopping salad vegetables while I finished the pasta, telling me stories about her own cooking disasters. "The first time I tried to make risotto," she said, "I stirred it so much that it turned into paste, like actual wallpaper paste consistency. My roommate said we could have renovated the bathroom with it. By the time we sat down to eat, the dinner was actually pretty good. Not the elegant, impressive meal I'd planned, but something better. It felt relaxed and real, like we'd been cooking together for years instead of frantically trying to salvage my romantic dinner gone wrong." "So," Nina said over dessert, store-bought ice cream, because I wasn't risking any more cooking, "was this supposed to be a date?" I felt my face get hot. Maybe. I was hoping it might be, but I completely blew it with the whole fire alarm situation. "Are you kidding?" she said. "This is the best first date I've ever been on. Most guys take you to dinner and try to impress you with how much money they can spend. You set off a fire alarm trying to make me homemade gnocchi. That's way more impressive. Even though I almost burned down my apartment." "Especially because you almost burned down your apartment. It shows commitment to the cause," she grinned. "Plus, now I know you're willing to risk personal injury to cook for me. That's valuable information." "So you'd be interested in a second date? One that maybe involves less emergency equipment?" "Only if you promise that if we cook together again, you'll let me help from the beginning instead of trying to do everything yourself." "Deal, but I'm making the gnocchi again. I need to redeem myself." "I'm looking forward to it," she said. "But maybe we should invest in a better smoke detector first." "Oasai, that story's over. Nothing says romance like setting off fire alarms and creating chaos in your kitchen while trying to impress someone." But the fact that she jumped right in to help salvage the disaster and then asked for a second date shows she was already interested in more than just his cooking skills. Our next story shows that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most unexpected opportunities. I spilled coffee on my crush, and they asked me out after. Monday mornings should come with a warning label. I don't function as a human being until I've had at least one cup of coffee, preferably two. So when I woke up late for work and discovered my coffee maker had decided to die overnight, I knew the day was going to be rough. I stopped at the coffee shop near my office, the kind of place with a line out the door and baristas who move at the speed of light to keep up with the morning rush. I finally got my large dark roast with an extra shot, paid way too much for caffeine delivery, and headed toward the exit. That's when I ran directly into Caleb. Not figuratively ran into him, literally collided with him as he was coming through the door while I was trying to leave. My coffee cup, which had been filled to the brim because I needed maximum caffeine that morning, went flying. The lid popped off mid-flight, and the entire contents of my extra-large coffee emptied directly onto Caleb's white dress shirt. It was like slow motion. I watched in horror as this wave of dark coffee soaked through his shirt, probably ruining it completely. He looked down at himself, then up at me, and I prepared myself for justifiable anger about his destroyed clothing. Instead, he started laughing. "Well," he said, looking down at his coffee-soaked shirt, "this is definitely one way to start a Monday." "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I said, frantically looking around for napkins or anything that might help with the disaster I'd just created. I wasn't paying attention. I was rushing. "I'm so incredibly sorry." "It's okay," he said, still smiling, despite being covered in coffee. "Really, it's just a shirt." I knew who Caleb was, of course. He worked in the building next to mine. and I'd seen him around the neighbourhood coffee shops and lunch places. He was always friendly when we'd ended up in line together, making small talk about the weather or complaining about how expensive downtown coffee had gotten. I'd developed a bit of a crush on him over the past few months, but had never worked up the courage to have a real conversation. And now I'd dumped an entire cup of coffee on him. This was definitely not how I'd imagined our first real interaction going. The barista appeared with a handful of towels, and I started desperately trying to blot the coffee out of Caleb's shirt. This only made things worse because now I was essentially rubbing his chest while he stood there, patiently letting me attempt damage control. "I think it's a lost cause," he said gently, stopping my frantic blotting, "but I appreciate the effort." "I have to replace your shirt," I said, "or pay for dry cleaning, or something. I can't just destroy your clothes and walk away." "You know what?" Caleb said, and there was something in his tone that made me look up at him. "You're right, you definitely owe me something." My heart sank. He was going to be reasonable about this, probably ask for my contact information, so he could send me the dry cleaning bill, which was fair, but also meant this embarrassing encounter was going to be extended over multiple interactions. "You owe me dinner," he continued. "That seems like fair compensation for a ruined shirt." I stared at him. "Dinner? Well, yeah. I figure if you're going to assault me with coffee, the least you can do is feed me afterward. Are you free Friday?" It took my brain a moment to process what was happening. "Are you asking me out?" "I'm letting you ask me out," he said with a grin, "as penance for your coffee crimes." "Is that how this works? I commit an accidental beverage attack and then have to take you to dinner?" "That's exactly how it works. I don't make the rules." I started laughing, partly from relief that he wasn't actually angry, and partly because the whole situation was so absurd. "Okay, yes. I will absolutely take you to dinner as compensation for destroying your shirt." "Great. And just so we're clear, this counts as you asking me out, not me asking you out. I want the record to show that you made the first move. By spilling coffee on you. The most romantic gesture possible. Clearly, you've been planning this for weeks. Obviously. I've been carrying that coffee around waiting for the perfect moment to weaponize it." Caleb laughed, and I realized that even covered in coffee and probably running late for work, he was handling this whole disaster with more grace than I would have managed if the roles were reversed. "I should probably go change shirts," he said, looking down at himself. "But text me about Friday. I promise I'll wear something that shows coffee stains less dramatically." He gave me his number, and I programmed it into my phone with slightly shaky hands. I was still processing the fact that my morning disaster had somehow turned into a date. "One more thing," he said, as he was heading back toward his office building. "Next time you want to ask someone out, maybe just try saying hello first. It's less messy." "But way less memorable," I called back. Friday's dinner was incredible. We talked for 3 hours and Caleb insisted on wearing a white shirt in honor of our coffee shop meeting. "For consistency," he explained. "Plus, now I know you're not carrying any beverages to throw at me." That story is over. Sometimes the worst possible way to get someone's attention turns out to be the best possible way to get someone's attention. The fact that he turned a completely embarrassing accident into a dinner invitation shows he was already interested and just needed an excuse to make a move. Our final story tonight proves that sometimes our secret admiration for someone isn't as secret as we think. My crush caught me drawing them and asked to keep the sketch. I've always been a doodler. Give me a pen and paper during a lecture, meeting, or pretty much any situation where I'm supposed to be paying attention to something else. And I'll end up with margins full of random sketches. It's not intentional, just how my brain processes information. I take my sketchbook everywhere, and during slow moments at the campus library, where I work part-time, I'll people watch and sketch. Students studying, professors grading papers, couples sharing headphones, just capturing little moments of life happening around me. That's how I started noticing Sophia. She came to the library every Tuesday and Thursday, around 2 in the afternoon, always claiming the same table by the tall windows on the second floor. She had this routine where she'd spread out her textbooks, arrange her pens by colour, and then spend the next 3 hours completely absorbed in whatever she was studying. What caught my attention wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she definitely was. It was the way she moved when she was thinking. She'd twirl her pen between her fingers, tuck strands of hair behind her ear, sometimes mouth words silently as she read. She had all these unconscious gestures that were fascinating to watch. I started sketching her without really meaning to. At first, just quick gesture drawings, trying to capture the way she sat or the angle of her head when she was concentrating. But over the weeks, the sketches became more detailed. I'd work on them during my breaks, adding shading, refining features, trying to get her expressions just right. I had maybe 15 different sketches of Sophia by the time she caught me. I was working on a drawing of her reading, completely absorbed in getting the shadows right on her face, when I heard someone clear their throat above me. I looked up to find Sophia standing next to my desk, looking down at my sketchbook with an expression I couldn't read. My face went immediately hot. There was no way to play this off casually. I was literally sitting there with a detailed drawing of her spread out on my desk, surrounded by other sketches of her from previous weeks. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, starting to close the sketchbook. "I know this probably seems really creepy. I wasn't trying to be weird about it. I just sketch people sometimes, when I'm bored, and you're always so focused when you study, which makes for good reference. But I realise how this looks, and I should have asked permission or something." I was rambling, getting more flustered by the second, but Sophia held up a hand to stop me. "Can I see it?" she asked. "See what?" "The drawing. You were working on it when I came over." I hesitated, then slowly opened the sketchbook back to the page I'd been working on. Sophia leaned over to get a better look, close enough that I could smell her perfume. "Wow," she said after a moment. "This is really good, like really good." "Thank you. But I'm still sorry for drawing you without asking. I know it's weird." "It's not weird," she said, straightening up but still looking at the sketch. "It's flattering. I had no idea anyone was paying that much attention to me." "Well, you're very—" I started, then stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence without making things more awkward. "Very what?" "Expressive. You have all these little gestures when you're thinking. It's interesting to draw." Sophia smiled, and it was the same gentle smile I'd been trying to capture in my sketches for weeks. "I've seen you drawing before," she said. "I always wondered what you were working on. I thought maybe you were taking art classes." "Just a hobby, something to do during slow shifts." "Well, you're really talented." She paused, looking back down at the drawing. "This is going to sound strange, but could I keep this one?" I blinked. "You want to keep it?" "If that's okay. I've never had anyone draw me before. It's kind of amazing to see how someone else sees you, you know?" I carefully tore the page from my sketchbook and handed it to her. "Of course, it's yours." "Thank you." She looked at the drawing one more time, then back at me. "I'm Sophia, by the way." "I know. I've heard people say your name. I'm Alex." "Nice to officially meet you, Alex." She held up the sketch. "I'm going to frame this and put it on my desk. Every time I look at it, I'll remember that someone thought I was worth watching." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Hey, if you ever want a more cooperative model, I'd be happy to pose for you sometime. Maybe somewhere with better lighting than the library." My heart did something complicated. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. You could even teach me some drawing techniques I've always wanted to learn." "I'd love that." "Great. I'll be at my usual table Thursday if you want to come ask me properly." That story is over. The fact that she not only wasn't creeped out by being sketched without permission, but actually wanted to keep the drawing and pose for more is incredible. Sometimes being caught doing something embarrassing turns into the perfect conversation starter. Plus, asking him to come find her on Thursday was basically giving him permission to make a move. These stories remind us that love isn't always about the perfect romantic gesture or the flawless pickup line. Sometimes it's about showing up with coffee when someone's having a bad day, or learning their favourite song, or just being brave enough to admit you've been nervous this whole time. Sometimes it's about helping someone clean up spilled lunch or laughing when they set off the fire alarm, trying to impress you. The internet gives us these little glimpses into moments when two people realise they've been thinking about each other all along. When someone drives 2 hours just to cheer at your graduation, or sits next to you every single day hoping you'll notice, or accidentally sends you a text that reveals exactly how they feel about you. What strikes me most about these stories is how ordinary they all are. No grand romantic gestures, no movie-perfect scenarios, just real people being awkward and nervous and human, finding each other in coffee shops and libraries and college cafeterias. The best love stories aren't the ones that make you think that would never happen to me. They're the ones that make you think maybe that could happen to me too. So there you have it. 15 stories that prove love isn't dead, it's just hiding in the most unexpected places. In coffee cups with handwritten notes, in 3 months of strategic seating arrangements, in fire alarms and spilled lunches, and accidentally sent text messages that reveal everything. What gets me about these stories is how none of them started with someone being smooth or having the perfect line. They started with someone being human, being nervous, being awkward, being so flustered they couldn't respond to a text for a week or so, focused on impressing someone that they nearly burned down their kitchen. They started with people who were convinced they were invisible, forgettable, out of someone's league, only to discover that person had been noticing them all along. Lila remembered a coffee order down to the cinnamon on top. Elena spent 3 weeks learning guitar just to play one song. Hannah drove 4 hours round trip to make sure someone didn't graduate alone. These aren't grand romantic gestures from movies. These are real people choosing to pay attention, choosing to show up, choosing to be brave in small quiet ways that end up meaning everything. Maybe that's what love actually looks like. Not the dramatic declarations or the perfect timing, but the willingness to sit on a bookstore floor, helping someone restack fallen books. The courage to finally admit you've been sitting in the same spot every day, hoping someone would notice. The grace to turn a coffee disaster into a dinner invitation, or a fire alarm into the best first date ever. These stories remind us that the person you're meant to be with might be sitting 3 desks away, struggling with the same shyness you are. They might be the childhood friend you never saw in that light. They might be the person who helps you move boxes and leaves their heart hidden inside one of them. So maybe keep your eyes open. Maybe notice who sits next to you every day, who remembers how you like your coffee, who helps you clean up when you make a mess. Maybe the love story you're waiting for isn't waiting to happen. Maybe it's already happening, one small, ordinary, beautiful moment at a time. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there is already drawing sketches of you when they think you're not looking.